All right, welcome everybody for this unconventional Wednesday night session where instead of the planned Plato reading as we had discussed last week, I had decided, I sort of stopped midway through an idea being born. And I think we made we covered a lot of terrain during the first part of the Art of Political Freedom about 9 days ago, introducing some major and lesser appreciated heroes of our past, like Thomas Cole, James Fenimore Cooper, names we've probably recognized on a certain level as artists, literary figures. Schiller was another important figure, but whose deeper role in world history has not been appreciated or has been intentionally obscured. The point of that class was to get across a challenge that Schiller had laid out very succinctly in the 1790s. And we're going to pick up where we left off a little bit, but I know that there's a couple of people here who weren't necessarily on the last session, so I set up the PowerPoint and we're going to look at a lot of paintings again. It'll be fun. We're going to look at a little bit of light, a little bit of darkness. We're going to look at some political agendas hovering over the stage of our play. But we're going to do a little bit of a recap as well of some of the key ideas that we'll just pick up off of. So I think that what I'll do is just do a screen share right now, and then hopefully we'll have a good discussion afterwards. Share. Okay. Can people see that screen? Can I get it yet?
Maximize it.
Right. Like so?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is titled "The Art of Political Freedom, Part 2: Alexander von Humboldt and the Battle to Save the Artistic Soul of America." Of course, we were introduced to a certain movement. Like I said, Schiller had inspired or challenged the world in the 1790s to do something very specific, which we're going to get at, and that involved partially not only creating a cultural movement dedicated to unifying the sciences and the arts, but to do that both within the context of a striving towards political freedom. Of course, the principles of the American Revolution were understood to be something that had to be defended with each generation, and not just defended with a constant formula, but rather made better and better, such that the forces that would otherwise wish to undo, disrupt, and undermine the successes of 1776 would have ever less of a stranglehold on the society that they wish to dominate. I'm, of course, referring to the oligarchical structures that had, at that time, much as it is today, found themselves enshrined principally within the center command structures of the British Empire. It's not that different in that sense if you look at what's really organizing the various facets of empire in today's world. So a quick recap as promised. So some of the key figures of our play who set the spiritual, philosophical terrain, the political terrain, involved Friedrich Schiller, who died in 1805, very young, though very productive, creative life. Alexander von Humboldt, who knew Schiller, they were very close friends, who did quite a lot in his much longer life as an international organizer. One of the things we're going to see is he basically revolutionized all of natural science, the method of how the mind of human beings goes to explore the universe, which involved unifying ecology, geology, cosmology, astrophysics, volcanism, botany, everything you could possibly imagine, within a context also of mapping out economic development projects, dam building, hydroelectric projects, railroads. I mean, it was all unified in his mind, and he did quite a bit. But he also did it with an artistic outlook, and he wrote specifically to artists and poets. And he worked and was a patron for many artists and poets around the world during the time that he was alive. And in many ways, the Hudson River School that we came to look at last week could not have come into being were it not for his work. And a very close friend as well of von Humboldt was James Fenimore Cooper, whose father was an American revolutionary, a leader with Washington. He was a leading member of the Society of Cincinnati, a patriotic network of sons, grandchildren of those who fought and were officers in the American Revolution. So he wasn't just a literary figure, and we're going to see a little bit more about his intelligence work as well. So Schiller, actually, before I go to the first quote or recap, Schiller made the point, looking at the destruction of the French Revolution, the undermining of the principles of Marquis de Lafayette, beginning at the end of 1789. He observed that the problem of the French, that was not the problem of the Americans, which resulted in the disaster of the French Revolution, the bloodbath, the Jacobin reign of terror, had a lot to do with a schism, a false dualism that had been embedded within the structural code of the culture and nobility of France, such that the leaders, those who had access to education culture, who were part of the elite, lacked a love of the people. They lacked a cultivation of their hearts. And similarly, the people lacked education, lacked culture, lacked literacy. It was a feudal peasant population that was just abused and victimized for a very long time. That created a pressure cooker, as is always the case, such that the climate, when the economic conditions could be pushed to the brink of despair, that bomb was made available where there was once people, and it could be triggered by specific demagogues, rabble-rousers, people like a Robespierre or a Danton, who were able to channel the rage and energy of the mob, the unthinking but yet very emotional feeling state that was dominating the mob peasantry, and turn it into a battering ram to kill both good and corrupt leaders alike, and thus dismantle the entire establishment. Again, baby out with the bathwater of France. And those who were qualified to lead that revolution failed. So, Schiller, as a playwright, a philosopher, diagnoses this disaster, and he writes his aesthetical letters his letters on the aesthetical education of man, outlining the importance of the role of play and the art and the artist in creating a situation culturally whereby both the minds and the emotions could grow together in a form of maturation whereby the artist would have the duty to be an instrument for the development of the people and the moral education of the people, but at the same time, the artist couldn't be literal. The artist, to be truly an artist, couldn't, or to have an effect, couldn't be a propagandist, couldn't be literally trying to hammer a message of be moral, be good, don't be bad. That doesn't really work. It doesn't resonate deeply in the heart. So that was the challenge for the artist. How do you do both, right? How do you both respect the freedom of the soul of your audience to find its own path while creating the conditions, whether you're a musician, a poet, a painter, that would facilitate that motion of the soul towards a better way, towards becoming more mature. So that was the challenge that we find that these figures took up. He also was challenging scientists to do the same thing. Cooper, of course, will again play a role. And so Schiller, he said, the artist may hint at those ideas and he may allude to those emotions, but he must never lay them out explicitly, lest he encroach upon the reader's own imaginative powers. So if you make it literal, you destroy, you suffocate the imaginative powers of the reader of the poem or the watcher of the play or the painting. Whatever, he says, whatever actual and explicit content the poet does incorporate will always remain finite. The potential content which he leaves us to fill in is infinitely great. So the painter always has a finite amount of colors to work with, a finite amount of space on his canvas. You're dealing with the objects that you're conveying. You can't paint justice. You can't paint freedom. Those are unbounded, infinite concepts in that sense. But you can paint. You have to use expressions of the material, finite world to convey an idea that awakens the love of justice, that shapes the idea of what justice or freedom is. So you're essentially dealing also with controlled ambiguity, controlled withholding, or creating controlled ironies that don't say exactly what you want, but that trigger the mind to think. And that space that's created inside of the mind and the soul can be filled by those who are feeling it, right? Those who own that soul can then fill it with something infinite. Hence those questions of the Platonic ideas of justice, of beauty, of honor, right? Of dignity. And so the painting, how you construct your work of whatever, we could think about that in poetry too if we want later, but he always selects as his objects a complex of phenomena existing in time rather than in space. Now in this case he's talking about actually this is specifically talking about a poet in this case, so we have to add space if we're talking about a painter. And he favors nature and motion over nature which is fixed and at rest. Before our eyes he unfolds her eternally changing drama, and her various phenomena are made to flow into each other with the most appealing continuous harmony. Very high ideal for art. And as an example, we went through the case study specifically of the founder of the American School of Design. There's another name for it. Well, the American Academy of Design, sorry. Which was not only the scientist painter Samuel B. Morse, who was a student of Benjamin West, but he also worked very closely with William Durant and and the figure that we're about to see, the author of this painting here, Thomas Cole. So this is we looked at a 5-part series of paintings that Thomas Cole, the landscape painter, conducted in the 1830s. It was called the Course of Empire, and we have the savage state, we've got the pastoral state. We looked at the state of maximum consummation, featuring an empire, but it's a bit of this empire specifically hasn't existed. It's a composite empire of a variety of different Ionian, as we said, Roman architectural designs. We don't know. It's got some Phoenician elements in this thing, but it's an archetypical composite empire, having moved from a state of early, another composite state of philosophers working on geometry in the sand, children at play, artists, and a lute player in the background with some women dancing, a shepherd, grazing with the sheep, and there's a druidic thing in the background there, a little canoe being built. So it's, again, a bit of a concept of what society looked like across many different civilizational dynamics within one painting. So, again, Irish, Greek, Roman, but we've got that period is being expressed. Same thing here is, we have what looks like native tribal teepees in a circle around a bonfire. We've got hunters. And so at a certain point, empire might find itself in a state of maximum decadence. But if something isn't maintained, it can go really bad. And, we have obviously like a military victory of some sort having just occurred. An elephant is being brought into this mythical empire. Not a lot of concerns about the world, but then we have here destruction, as he calls it, where something happened, something was missing, and the empire goes into serious collapse. Finally, he ends it out his fifth part of the series with desolation. And this is nature just overtaking the empire, no signs of human life or activity at this point. And do you guys remember last week, for those who were there, what was the constancy amongst all of the 5 paintings? People could take themselves off of mute. We don't have too many people today.
Prometheus.
The mountain.
The absence of Prometheus, and yes, the mountain is key. So
the mountain.
He chose to convey the exact same mountain in each of the scenes, right? Now, the thing that was lacking, as Dave just pointed out, was the figure of Prometheus. And again, I don't know if I would have come to this discovery on my own were it not for the work that had been published by Pierre Baudry, whose research on some of this material is going to be in the description box. I'm going to draw upon a lot of his research throughout the course of the following presentation. But, he's challenging people viewing this thing, and hundreds of thousands of Americans viewed this series. And he's challenging them at a time when the U.S. is going into a point of decadence to think, like, well, what is it that is allowing us to become corrupted as a people in the 1830s under Andrew Jackson and the rise the rise of populism, of mob rule, of the idea of the slave power gaining its control vastly especially in the 1830s, and especially the destruction of the civil liberties of the natives, which really began in full force under Andrew Jackson. And so towards the end of his life, the last 2 years of his life, Thomas Cole sort of places that same mountaintop, but now he features the master key that would have solved the problem of the collapse of empire, which is the figure of Aeschylus's Prometheus. And there you have a vulture going to munch on the liver of Prometheus, who is punished by the figure of Zeus in the play of Prometheus by Aeschylus, for essentially the crime of having stolen the fire from the gods, from Zeus, disobeyed Zeus's law, and gave fire to mankind because Prometheus, a demigod, believed in something that the higher immortals of Olympus didn't believe in, which is that human beings had the potential to be great. And he describes how when the figures representing Zeus, the peons, try to persuade him to simply apologize to Zeus and to tell Zeus what he knows about Zeus's ultimate downfall, which will happen at some point in the future. And the name Prometheus is, after all, another way of saying foresight, the ability to see the future, forecasting. And he refuses. He says, I'm going to rather receive the punishment of having my liver eaten every day by this vulture for 10,000 years. I would rather do that because I love human beings so much. And he describes it in thorough detail. His love of humanity is what compels him and gives him courage, rather than tell Zeus how he's ultimately going to face his downfall. So that's a powerful character trait that very few people exhibit throughout history. But when they do exhibit it, we're very appreciative. I would say, if anything, human history could not have moved out of the caves were it not for this attribute of those who would defy the law of tyrants and stand up, even at risk of their own life, for the good of humanity, because they see something in themselves, in God's creation, and in their fellow man that other people just don't see. So if you don't have that in civilization in your society, then guaranteed you're going to go the way of any empire, as all empires do collapse. And that's what Plato also gets across in his Republic, that if you don't have the ability to create a society of philosopher kings where everybody becomes effectively capable of thinking of the highest ideas, thus being sovereign citizens, you will always have the cycle of moving from mob rule to tyranny, to mob rule to tyranny, cyclically forever. You won't be able to break that cycle of destruction. That's in Plato's Republic. That's why the founding fathers, the best of them, were all Platonic philosophers. They were studying how Rome fell from being a republic, how it became an empire, what was Plato actually saying. And they were all thinking about how do they create a culture of Prometheanism that would inspire the Promethean spark in everybody, each generation, that would get better. So we counterposed this movement of the arts that Thomas Cole led with another simultaneous movement coming from Britain, featuring as one of its champions a figure named Turner, J.S. Turner. And this is some examples of what Turner, who had a very classical, very, very strong early phase of his painting style, he quickly started painting themes that involved destruction of lives without really much of a moral message. I dare anybody to really find messages that were moral in intent that Turner embedded within his paintings. That he wanted.
Matt?
Yes, Susie.
I had raised my hand, but I don't think you saw it.
Oh, I can't see anything but my own slides right now.
I really don't want to let that moment go by. I think we all need to embrace that Promethean spirit in this hour, that we have the love for beauty and truth and the hope for humanity that would inspire us to stand up in any way we need to against just the onslaught of evil and idiocy in our culture.
I second that, Susie.
I think we all need to do the work inside ourselves that we truly embrace that Promethean spirit.
Hear, 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 hear. Okay, so here's somebody who didn't have that Promethean spirit. Was J.S. Turner. And Turner, I don't know what happened in his personal life, but he starts painting really destructive themes. And here's an example of one of them, of a home that was being lived in by people, destroyed by a major boulder in an avalanche. I think it has the world record of being the first time that was ever done in a painting. Okay, let me just go to the next one here. Uh-oh. My computer just froze up on me. Okay, people can still see that?
No, just you.
Okay. So another set, by the 1830s, 40s, he starts really.
We can't see your slides.
You can't see the slides?
No.
Okay, let me do this again. Mm-hmm. Oh, Dasha entered the room. Cynthia, can you let Dasha in?
Yes, I've been managing that. It's
oh,
okay.
You're great. Thank you. All right. Okay, you guys can see that now?
Yeah.
But maximize. Yeah.
Done. All right. So again, more examples. We looked at a lot more Turner, but here's just a few examples of, Vesuvius killing a ton of people. We got another destruction of a Swiss village. We got Morning After the Deluge. That's his biblical paintings. So there's a high deconstruction what we see, and we see a fixation upon using cadmiums, using lights, getting an emotional vibe, obviously. But the question is, using Schiller's ideal of artwork, does this even come close? Some other examples of things that we looked at are ships crashing, being destroyed, a lot of lives being lost. So Turner also, he spends a lot of time in Venice, where he develops a yet newer style using watercolors, and again playing with like a lot of luminescent ideas. Very minimalist. He starts cracking out these things like 30 paintings a day, kind of mass production style. Very, very ominous, very, very melancholy feelings. Things being burned, Parliament being burned. When he does feature industrial activity or trains, it's typically around some idea of chaos, anarchy. So obviously, there's not a very silent or subtle philosophy of how he thinks of civilization or people. But his misanthropy is much appreciated by the figure of John Ruskin, who we looked at, the founder of the Pre-Rafaelite movement, who becomes his sort of key sponsor, grand strategist for what becomes the Round Table movement. He teaches at Oxford. He creates the St. George's Society to organize and rally both the elites around stopping industrial growth. He co-founds the Working Men's College with John Stuart Mill, which becomes a college out of which he organizes a revolutionary newspaper. As an elitist himself, who's calling for an organized oligarchy and a return to medievalism as his social ideal and aesthetic ideal, he organizes this people's paper, and he employs as one of his key authors on economy and politics none other than Karl Marx. Friedrich Engels works very closely with him through one of his key collaborators, William Morris. Together they co-found the arts and crafts movement to try to basically create the idea of art therapy, making art little, getting rid of the ideals, returning art to the idea of painting details, making it sensual, right? Make art something which makes you fall back in love with your senses, especially the sense of touch. And ideals, he basically thinks of as being just a corrupting influence that alienates us. Much in the same way that Engels and Ludwig Feuerbach and others who influenced the communist movement all pretty much said that religion is an opiate for the masses. It's a corrupting influence because it alienates us from ourselves, and that's why we need to have a pure society based on scientific management of a world. So anyway, this is what inspires Cecil Rhodes. So we looked at a little bit of Ruskin. I kept a couple of quotes that we'll reread because they're just so important. He targets in his Stones of Venice. He spends a lot of time in Venice. He loves Venice. He writes that the rationalist, and he's critical, kept the arts and cast aside religion. He says he loves a religion, but he loves the medieval religion, the type where people knew and were happy, he thinks, in their little mini place as feudal Christians, illiterate, trusting the elites, trusting the priests to interpret the Bible for them, where the knights and lords who he adores were secure in their positions in their castles. So he says, this rationalistic art is the art commonly called Renaissance. You got to imagine this being said with a snarky tone in his voice. Lower and lower declines the level of absurd, abused intellect. The base school of landscape gradually usurps the place of the historical painting, which had sunk into prurient pedantry. I have not written in vain if I have heretofore done anything towards diminishing the reputation of the Renaissance landscape painting. He despises the Renaissance. And he specifically despises not just landscape painting of the Renaissance vibe, which is more than simply portraying nature in a literalistic way. It's not that. There's something else that we're going to see more of. But he specifically in this work, I took those quotes out, but he specifically defines the moment of corruption being at the core cause. 1509 to 1510 is what he defines as the moment that art and culture became destroyed and rotten with the Renaissance virus. He didn't call it a virus, but the poison. And that moment was when Raphael Sanzio completed the Stanza della Signatura in the Vatican, the room where all treaties were signed, that features the famous School of Athens, featuring the dispute between Plato and Aristotle. It features each wall has a different theme on it. This is a wall with Apollo representing sort of and the muses of ancient Greece representing the sort of creative spirit. You have Homer, you got Dante, a variety of other figures, contemporary and past, mythological and real. You also have the disputation of the sacrament. There's a lot politically in that we talked about, but just to say, you got Christ above with the saints, and then you have a variety of political figures and church figures, including Raphael himself, who he paints with a little papal hat on the left-hand side, down below right here. You also have Innocent III, who was the Crusader Pope, with Thomas Aquinas, who wrote a legal justification for the temporal controls of the Pope that were used to back up and justify the Crusades. You got there's a lot going on in here, but just to say, this is a giant mural. You got and also you have a wonderful ceiling, frescoes on the ceiling that define different elements of justice, piety, honor. So, he says this is the moment of corruption. Keep in mind, this is also the moment, 1508 to 1509, for those who have read Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 4, little plug right there. This is also the moment of the League of Cambrai that saw the near complete annihilation of Venice as a force of the oligarchy from the earth forever, when for the first time in history, the forces of the Platonic Christian Renaissance humanists organized a coalition of powers who stopped fighting for once and realized that they were all being manipulated into killing each other for hundreds of years by the same Venetian center of evil that managed bullion, gold, maritime, and overland trade routes, managed the Genghis Khan, and even many of the Mongol invasions in the east. The Venetians had the only right to trade amongst Venetian-controlled zones. No other European power had those rights, undoubtedly in favor of providing the Khans with very, very high-level intelligence that the Venetians had procured through their networks of spies in the courts of Europe, as well as of Russia, Muscovy, and what have you, as well as of the Ottoman Empire, India, China. So anyway, Venice was really bad. And Venice was nearly wiped off the map, as I just pointed out, by the coalition of the League of Cambrai, which was only sabotaged through a stroke of evil genius in 1509 at the end of that term, when Venice becomes all of a sudden the ally of the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor and Maximilian III. And all of a sudden the League turns on France and Florence and Milan and basically starts cannibalizing itself. But anyway, what is sparked here and what is being represented is a movement that posited that human beings, not just the elite, but all human beings were made in the image of God as a living force that could participate in creation in a way that would make things better for ourselves and posterity. This was very clearly the key impulse, and there were corrupting impulses within the Renaissance as well, right? It's not just a pure black or white thing, but this was the most potent concept, which it took some time for this to be politically enshrined, but when it took the form of what we can see in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution. So anyway, Ruskin, who says that the high point of art's greatness that we have to return to, hence the name Pre-Rafaelite Society, right? We have to return to the pre-Raphael, the pre-Renaissance age of aesthetics, of politics. This is why the Round Table movement of Cecil Rhodes picked the name Round Table, who, again, Rhodes was a student of Ruskin. He says it is Venice, and in Venice only, that effectual blows can be struck at this pestilent art of the Renaissance. Destroy its claims to admiration there, and it can assert them nowhere else. This, therefore, will be the final purpose of the following essay, which is his Stones of Venice. All right, so we have our anti-Schiller character. Now, just to get across the insight politically of the figures of the American Revolution and those who organized what became the Hudson River School of Painting, James Fenimore Cooper writes in his The Bravo, which Cynthia did an amazing class on The Bravo. If anybody hasn't seen it, I highly recommend checking this out. But this book, and it's available on archive.org, it lays out, it takes place in Venice, much as does the case of similar kindred spirits as Cooper, as we see with William Shakespeare, who wrote The Merchant of Venice and Othello, exposing the same sort of thing that Cooper is exposing, or Schiller himself, who wrote The Go-Seer. Again, Cynthia's class on The Go-Seer, mandatory watching, studying even for anybody who wants to really understand intelligence operations. So Cooper does the same thing. He situates the story, The Bravo, in Venice, featuring the tale, or involves the tale of a certain Venetian assassin. Within the book, which I admit as a disclaimer, I have not read, but I do thank Cynthia for pulling out these quotes. He does point out that Venice, though ambitious and tenacious of the name of a republic, was in truth a narrow, a vulgar, and an exceedingly heartless oligarchy. To the former title she had no other claim than her denial of the naked principle already mentioned, while her practice is liable to the reproach of the two latter in the unmanly and narrow character of its exclusion in every act of her foreign policy and in every measure of her internal police. Venice was organized around a system of secret policing operations. So not only did she organize divide to conquer forever wars internationally, as well as debt slavery, but internally, domestically, she had secret police. There was a system of the population, sort of, it was like McCarthyism. Everybody was afraid of being overheard speaking critically of the system of shadow government managing Venice. And all you had to do was to condemn your neighbor or somebody you didn't like on a piece of paper, put it in a certain mouth of a very specific lion representing the department in which the Committee of Three that oversaw the executions, the secret executions of all of Venice. There was the Committee of 10, the Committee of Three, and then the Doge. And the Committee of Three had essentially godlike powers. And they would see that paper, and essentially the next day, that person who was being condemned for being a traitor would show up dead in the lagoons. And Venice is a city of lagoons. There's no real trees or parks. So we're going to read a longer quote. We did not read this quote last week, so we'll read this now. Describing Venice, and he's already gone through here, he's already broken through and discussed earlier on the structure of the Committee of 10, the oligarchical access to the Senate. So you had to be part of one of the key families in a specific book to be allowed to be in the Senate. And above the Committee of 10, you had the Committee of 3, and above the Committee of 3, you had the Doge. And it was really a balance of power structure managed essentially by certain cults. So he says here, the reader will at once, and he's talking to Americans here, the reader will at once see that the very reason why the despotism of the self-styled Republic of Venice was tolerable to its own citizens was but another cause of its eventual destruction. There existed at all times in the heart of Venice a mysterious and despotic power that was wielded by men who moved in society unknown, and apparently surrounded by all the ordinary charities of life, but which in truth was influenced by a set of political maxims that were perhaps as ruthless, as tyrannic, and as selfish as ever were invented by the evil ingenuity of man. It was, in short, a power that could only be entrusted without abuse to infallible virtue and infinite intelligence, using the terms in a sense limited by human means, the Council of Three met in secret, ordinarily issued its decrees without communicating with any other body, and had them enforced with a fearlessness of mystery and a suddenness of execution that resembled the blows of fate. The advances of the human intellect, supported by the means of publicity, may temper the exercise of a similar irresponsible power in our own age. But in no country has this substitution of a soulless corporation for an elective representation been made, in which a system of rule has not been established that sets at naught the laws of natural justice and the rights of the citizen. Any pretension to the contrary, by placing profession in opposition to practice, is only adding hypocrisy to usurpation. It appears to be an unavoidable general consequence that abuses should follow when power is exercised by a permanent and irresponsible body from whom there is no appeal. When this power is secretly exercised, the abuses become still more grave. It is also worthy of remark that in the nations which submit or have submitted to this undue and dangerous influence, or these undue and dangerous influences, the pretensions to justice and generosity are of the most exaggerated character, while the fearless democrat vents his personal complaint aloud, and the voice of the subject of professed despotism is smothered entirely. Necessity itself dictates to the oligarchist the policy of seemliness as one of the conditions of its own safety. He's saying a lot here, but I'm hoping I'm making people want to read the Bravo. I will too, as of this this lecture. I'm going to really dive into this fully. But I mean, the key is that the oligarchist who demands absolute control and corporate power over any ability to appeal to even know what's happening to the citizens of that system, of that society, that world is such a defiance of natural law that it causes itself, as he says, to induce its own destruction. It stifles the creative spark within the people, which is necessary for that society's own very renewal and existence. So, yeah, can't allow the Venetian structures to infest the United States. So some other examples we looked at of Thomas Cole's paintings, the stages of life, right, of a 4-part painting of a baby being born, being looked over by an angel, going off as a young man into the world with an idealized sort of heaven on earth that he's aspiring to, this mythical structure, this composite, followed by the troubles in life. The angel is further back now watching, giving him the freedom to make mistakes, and old age as the human being is entering the end of his life, right, and going back to the eternal. So just to say that, again, this is, if you're going to become a Promethean, you have to have this sense of your own mortality and the purpose of life beyond your simple sensual experiences. Without that, you can't have a society of citizens, only a society of sensual human cow serfs. This brings us now to part 2 of our series. Friedrich Church and Albert Bierstadt. So, Thomas Cole only had one official student in the time that he was alive. And maybe he would have had more if he didn't die so soon. He died in 1846. He was barely 40. No, sorry, he died in 1848, around the same month as Edgar Allan Poe. And there are correspondences, as I mentioned last week, between Edgar Allan Poe and Thomas Cole. Hard to find them, but they do exist. They do seem to have been part of the similar operation, as we know with James Fenimore Cooper, who worked closely with a network of people in Washington Irving, who wrote Rip Van Winkle, was also the U.S. ambassador to Spain during that same time, 1830, when Thomas Cole was in Europe, was in France specifically with Marquis de Lafayette, and Cooper and Poe, organizing for a second attempt to undo the travesty of the failure of the French Revolution of 1789 to 94. So there was a second chance. Lafayette nearly became the president in 1830. He dropped the ball. He allowed for a king to be declared after Charles IX, and that king was a bad king, obviously, and basically fired Marquis undid all of the plans of the international network of Republicans who wanted to finally break the control of Venice that had then taken control for about a century. They'd taken control of the British Empire through the city of London as their center command. That was nearly again broken, but that whole plan that was decades in the work was sabotaged. All that to say, Thomas Cole was a part of that process. So was Poe. The fact that they both died, the fact that they were both doing something very similar with their art, I think leaves room for investigators to, in the future, to peel the onion and figure out the real story of how Poe was killed and how Cole died a very strange, a very quick death. And were they connected? Challenging people who might be listening on YouTube or live. So Frederick Church was his sole student, and Frederick Church worked closely with his best friend Albert Bierstadt, a German immigrant who came to America and led the Hudson River School. Both of these guys become the champions of the Hudson River School, and both of them are also devout followers of the thinking, not only of Schiller, but specifically of Alexander von Humboldt. And Humboldt is somebody who is just a miracle of, like I said, I alluded to what he did at the beginning. He was an organizer in Europe as part of what I just mentioned. He organized, what did he do? His work in his life involved working with Gauss as well as other scientists, but specifically with Gauss to map out the magnetic field of the Earth, creating international magnetic surveys. He doubled the knowledge of the plant index known in Europe through his voyages in South America, Mexico, which took on over 4 years of his life from 1799 to 1804. He discovered the nature of volcanoes, volcanism, and how volcanism always tends to occur over the fault lines embedded within the Earth. He was looking at the relationships of solar activity and weather. He was looking at the role of the carbon cycle, how carbon drives photosynthesis, how trees give off oxygen. What are the cycles in forests? He also discovered things like the isothermal zodiac, the isothermal zones indicating that similar vegetation will grow similarly globally, dependent upon the altitude and general climate of an environment. So, the tundra of Russia, the tundra of Canada would have very similar foliage, not very diverse, but obviously still very similar characteristics. We'd see the same thing in the equatorial zones. So in his Cosmos, which influences so many Americans on so many levels, and especially the Hudson River School painters, he describes here his concept of nature, which is a unifying of all different facets of nature under one holistic view that is tied to art, where he says nature is the domain of freedom. So even though he's discovering laws of nature, he's making a point they're not the type of cold deterministic laws. It's a law that involves freedom. You can't presume that that is separate from law, though. Just like Schiller, right? Duty and freedom are two parts of the same thing. To have true freedom means you have a willful choice to accept responsibility for processes. The lower order of freedom, which is a fake freedom, is the freedom of the slave that just wants to enjoy, enjoy candy and getting drunk and not actually developing any sense of moral development or responsibility. That's the freedom of the master-slave relationship. So he says, whoever contemplates what is revealed through investigation into natural science, not for the specific stages of education or the individual requirements of social life, but for its boundless relationship to mankind as a whole, is offered the most delectable fruit through insight into the coherence of phenomena that increases and ennobles our delight in nature. To seek answers from man's antiquity means to trace the secret course of ideas until one arrives at the same image that had early shimmered before the inner sense as a harmonically ordered whole, a cosmos, which finally reveals itself as the fruit of long and arduous research. Two kinds of joy are mirrored in the contemplation of the world in each of these epochs. In the first awakening of a people's consciousness, and then the simultaneous development of all branches of culture. The former is awakened in man's receptive and childlike sense by his entrance into the natural world, and by the vague feeling of harmony which rules the eternal change of its silent motion. The other joy derives from the highest level of the education of the human species, and the reflection of this education in the individual. It springs from an insight into the order of the universe and the combined action of physical forces. So again, very, very different idea of nature than what we tend to be given today when science is defined by the cold utilitarians. And finally, for art, in volume 2 of the Cosmos, which is 4 volumes, volume 2, he writes, in order to depict nature in its exalted sublimity, we must not dwell exclusively on its external manifestations, but we must trace its image reflected in the mind of man, at one time filling the dreamy land of physical myths with forms of grace and beauty, and at another developing the noble germ of artistic creations. And again, his challenge, just like Schiller, was how do you portray nature in such a way that you awaken the higher love of God, of human beings, of nature in the heart of a human being? How do you, as well as intelligible ideas, how do you embed discoveries of ideas within a medium like painting, which by its nature is a relatively fixed medium, right? So that's a huge challenge, and he's really focusing on landscape painting, the thing Ruskin and the medievalists despise the most. So here's a painting. I forgot the name of the painter. It was a French painter who did this in 1810, featuring Alexander von Humboldt. It says here, Humboldt and his fellow scientist Aimé Bonpland at the foot of the Chimborazo volcano, which I believe is in Ecuador. And they're working there with Native Americans in Latin America. This is, again, where some of the most robust discoveries into nature happened that Alexander von Humboldt had made. This is a quick map featuring his voyage from Europe, working with friends in the courts of Spain, where he made it down north of Brazil into, again, this is all Spanish territory, right? And he moved all the way through. He went all the way down as far as Lima, Peru. In Colombia, he was in Nicaragua, Venezuela, Mexico, Cuba, and Philadelphia, where he spent a very important week in Washington and Philadelphia, where he became a member of Ben Franklin's Philosophical Society. He became a member of the American Society of Arts and Science. He influenced a hell of a lot. He worked with Jefferson in that time. He basically took his maps that he gave to Jefferson. He made extensive maps of Mexico and South America, and he gave those copies to Jefferson as one of the components of what helped make up Jefferson's mind to follow through on the Louisiana Purchase, which expanded America's territory by a factor of something like twofold, threefold. I don't know. It was big. The Louisiana Territory, which was French territory sold by Napoleon in 1804, was massive. And so, again, Alexander von Humboldt believed in manifest destiny. He believed in the idea of taking the best of civilization and amplifying the best qualities of what civilization has created from all parts of the world and uplift everybody to a better way, while at the same time eliminating the structures of cultural poison of things like Venice, of Ruskin's mode of thinking. And Ruskin had a lot of disciples by this time. So yeah, and he was also a big, while he worked very closely and befriended many natives of South America and Mexico, Incans or people who were from the Incan world and what have you. And he was always a defender of the equal rights of all men. And he was always making a point that slavery, he was a lifelong hater of slavery. He saw that was the big challenge for America, was to break free of its dissonance acceptance early on of slavery. It tolerated it way too much. Even Jefferson was the biggest slave owner in Virginia, right? This is a big contradiction that he spent a lifetime organizing against. He supported the early Republican movement at the end of his life in 1856, People like John Fremont was a close friend of Alexander von Humboldt, as was, anyway. So he always advocated the universal rights of all humankind to access their creativity. This is one of the low quality scans. I couldn't find high quality scans of the designs of South America of Mexico that he put together that was used by Jefferson. And he traveled a lot. He, just like Humboldt, he traveled the world. And, he was always expanding the imagination because people, especially in that time, it was difficult to travel. It took 2 weeks or 4 weeks just to get a letter across the ocean. So the ability to expand the mental space of citizens was a precondition to have sovereign citizens who could think about the context of the world that they lived in and the boundary conditions that they should want to leap over as part of being a creative society, always overcoming the limits to growth. That was the basis of the healthy branch of Manifest Destiny. And for people who have heard me or read my works or Cynthia's works, they know that we acknowledge an unhealthy, toxic branch of Manifest Destiny as well that was based on more of a Roman Empire idea of smothering the weak, of crushing the savages, of and spreading an ethno-nationalist view of the white race over the world. That's the Cecil Rhodes Manifest Destiny. That was the slave power Manifest Destiny of Albert Pike. That was not what we're talking about here. So we've got these competing ideas, right, that are not compatible. So Frederick Church has this painting of the Aurora Borealis he paints in 1865. Again, with a certain beam of light expressing this is the tip of Canada, and the beam of light at the time, along with the aurora, which had just been charted as part of the Gauss Alexander von Humboldt mapping of the magnetic field, and the aurora is the cause of cosmic radiation, or it's being caused by cosmic radiation entering into the magnetic field and ionosphere of the Earth, and that's what makes these beautiful colors and lights at the poles. So this idea involved a concept of communicating over great spaces of time. That's what Samuel B. Morse, the painter scientist, was innovating. Was how do you transmit thought, right? Using light. And things like radio waves are a species of light, electromagnetism, and that could only travel because of the magnetic field around the Earth and the ionosphere specifically. And the telegraph wires that were being laid at the time that this is being painted, going across the Atlantic. We have the light from the other side of the ocean indicating that. So a lot of his paintings have this, indicating also the old school way of transmitting letters and transmitting information using simple shipping is not sufficient in the age where we're breaking out of the limits to those former limits to growth. So again, we could look at, and I encourage people to look at a lot of Hudson Rule painters. Asher B. Durant is a great example. There's so many. Sanford. There's so many. I mean, I'm going to have a list of different names for people to Google and just look at some beautiful paintings. But I'm going to focus on Bierstadt and Church for this one. We have here just an example of him. I think this is again in Ecuador, where he's painting nature, but it's not the typical type of like just boring landscape. It's not just nice landscape. He's using a science of color, of light, that you see on a variety of levels. Each piece of foliage actually is what you find in nature. He's doing kind of the sort of thing Da Vinci did. He's not just making things up or painting something random, but there is freedom in it as well. He's not just being constricted by the literalism of nature. There's a case of the Cotopaxi mountain that he painted in 1855. That was a little villa, a little house where Alexander von Humboldt stayed 50 years earlier. And everywhere Frederick Church went, he had Alexander von Humboldt's Cosmos, and he traced much of Humboldt's voyage that was outlined and produced in the course of the Cosmos. So this is an active volcano. That's going to come in later, actually. He used this on several themes. We have a zone of the Pichincha in, I think it was in Nicaragua, where a major war was fought in 1827. And this is also a period where there is a push towards a war, which is being set up as we speak, as this is happening. there's a war between, I think it's Peru and Nicaragua, which is initiated by the British. And the British essentially get Peru to sell off some disputed territory of the Amazon rainforest in order to get money to pay British debt in 1857. And Nicaragua doesn't appreciate that, and you have a war, which goes on. It's a devastating war that the British orchestrate between these powers. And Frederick Church is there on ground. I'd imagine he's probably organizing. He's organizing like-minded thinkers throughout South America this whole time. It's not just the bad guys organizing things like the Mazzini Young Europe movement, which is very active, creating anarchist operations. Garibaldi being a part of this young Europe faction within South America, within Colombia, within South America more broadly. There's always something to look at, and I mean, obviously, he embeds often anomalies within his beautiful paintings. And in this case, obviously, you have the divine, right? He's using the light always to get across something which is very transcendental. But the anomaly here is obviously this very precarious journey that this local is making with his donkey over this rope bridge, which I'd imagine it's a huge canyon. It's probably very scary of a journey, very precarious, and it probably denotes the type of precarious situation that Latin America was in at that time amidst the impending war. He actually did the studies for this. It was painted in 1867, but the studies was 1857, a decade earlier, right as the war is taken off. All right, it's a little close up here. These are massive murals, by the way. I got to say, or not murals, but these are massive paintings, like 5 by 7 feet, huge, very immersive. So if you're somebody in the 1860s who's paid a quarter you've stood in line and you're there experiencing this. You're really taking it in. It's very, very, it's bringing you into it. So you're journeying into the Arctic, you're journeying into South America, you're journeying into the areas of the painter's mind, and he's pulling you in, not by just giving you some literalist expression, like I said. So yeah, again, a very precarious journey. That bridge cannot have been painted any more precariously. Not something you'd feel comfortable carrying your donkey or riding a donkey over, that's for sure. Another giant painting was Niagara on the Canadian side. And what's interesting about this one, not only do you have a certain rainbow going down, but you have him selecting a position of Niagara where it doesn't really exist. There's no boat that can get this close. There's no land here. So he had to put himself, and he did this to put the viewer in a sort of state where there's nothing to hold on to. There's no foreground, right? You're really in it. And it's something which sort of gets you out of your skin a bit. It's a very interesting thing. I'm sure there are many other points and intentions that he might have had embedded in it, but I don't know what they are. But it's certainly a powerful thing that moves the soul. And as Schiller says, not everything needs to be literal. In fact, nothing should be literal if it is going to be truthful. So I think there should be a certain space to just appreciate the disequilibrium a little bit, right? In this case, there is a bit of a foreground to step on, and this is the American side of Niagara done as part of the set. Again, just extraordinarily beautiful stuff. I just wanted to show it just to get across the appreciation for the laws of nature, and yet the freedom. It's just got a grandiosity to it, right? But also the use of light, of shadow, of atmospheric, what's called atmospheric perspective. Perspective is the object in size diminishing as it moves away from the point of observation. Atmospheric perspective or aerial perspective is the diminishment of the contour, of the color, those attributes of an object as it is being moved away from the point of observation due to the fact that space is not empty, right? A Newtonian, somebody who's using a naive abstract idea of space might presume the space between planets or the space between objects is empty, but the reality is it's full, it's saturated with either cosmic radiation and radiations of the full spectrum in space that's constantly being permeated and and seeing light move through it and other things, or in the case of the Earth, you have a density of vapor all the time in varying degrees. Now, I mentioned before we had Cotopaxi. We have Cotopaxi again. Now, what I find interesting about, again, Church is not like his teacher Cole. Cole is a little bit more, has a certain way of communicating his moral lessons. I think we all got a sense of that in the stages of empire and the stages of life. Church is a little bit more subtle, but not like, he uses symbols, but they're not like Masonic symbology. It's very different. There's a certain, it's more in common. I think a Chinese Song Dynasty landscape painter would recognize a lot, would speak this language. It's a fascinating thing, actually. At some point, maybe I'll ask Quan to do a comparative study on Chinese landscape painting and this American school. Now, he painted this particular rendition of Cotopaxi blowing up in 1863. And everybody knows what's going on in 1863 in America, right? So you got the Civil War raging. It's not looking good. It's a very precarious moment, a very scary moment. And just like anybody who's living in or near the around the terrain of Cotopaxi exploding would probably feel a lot of fear. But while the volcano is a source of heat, it's a source of destruction. It does emit light. Lava does emit light in that sense. Smoke and darkness is coming out of it. There's still a hope because you have a more permanent quality of light in this painting as well, right? So I think that important contrast of the sun rising demonstrates that there is a higher function of consistent light, of a stronger power of hope that permeates and that supersedes, transcends the ephemeral, chaotic world of forms that we live in. That can get very dangerous and scary. So again, that contrast of light and darkness is very important. He even has a little a figure down there with his llama in the bottom left-hand side. There's always these fun things to discover, which are often missed in these paintings. And unfortunately, I couldn't find something of a high density resolution, but this is as good as we can get. These are huge paintings. The other thing to point out is that this particular terrain didn't really exist in this specific way. So while he is a landscape painter, people say, oh, but those are people who don't use imagination. They just paint what they see. Frederick Church and the Hudson River School painters didn't paint what they saw. They did studies of nature and they created composites, and they often embedded stories, visual jokes, sometimes lessons within it. But they were not literalists. I don't think that there was ever a vantage point of where any human being could physically stand at that moment, at that place, and paint that type of drawing, that type of painting. He had to do a lot of different studies on the spot, which we'll talk about later. This is another massive painting, 6 by 9 feet, called The Heart of the Andes. And 5 by 10 feet. Now again, this particular frame, you couldn't go anywhere in Ecuador and find this specific scene. It's a composite of many scenes. There's something like 80 different types of foliage, of trees, of wildlife that he embeds within it, little birds you'll explore, or you could explore if this thing was in front of you. But what's interesting, and Pierre Baudry makes this point, that what he does is he takes the highest density, as Alexander von Humboldt proves, is that this part of the earth features the highest, in the smallest space, has the largest density and diversity of life. And it features climatic terrain going from the base of that mountain, or of the Andes. So if you go from the tip of the Andes all the way to the coast of Ecuador, that's only about 50 miles. And that 50 miles features such a density of different climates, climate zones, and according forms of life, associated life, that you would otherwise only find that spectrum by moving 5,000 miles from the Ecuador to the northern part of the Earth. So it's high density, very interesting place on the Earth. 5 different climate zones are featured within this painting. Again, very true to life. And again, it's called The Heart of the Andes. And so the question is, well, what is the heart of the Andes? So I'd actually ask people on right now. Does anybody think like what would be the heart? What are their theories of why he called this the heart of the Andes? What is it about this painting which is the heart of the Andes?
Just from what you've said, I'm getting a really strong impression of the diversity.
Yep.
And the teeming with life.
Definitely.
And that means teeming with opportunity for growth, for everything.
I think that's definitely, there's no right answer, wrong. Well, there are probably some wrong answers, but there's no absolute right answer in this. But I think what you just said is very important. I mean, Humboldt as well, he also was examining different river systems that could be potentially conducive for building dams, irrigation, things like that. I personally think, and there's a lot of speculation, and one thing that's interesting is that when I looked online for this painting, many of the scans of this painting on major museum websites feature an area blackened out where you can't even see what it is. Can people guess what that blackened out area might be?
There's a cross.
Yeah, right down there. So, well, just quickly, yeah, you got some really just to get across the intricacy of his details, right, of this painting. But yeah, that cross is where you actually have a couple of people praying. It appears to be possibly a gravesite where they're remembering a member of their family or a friend or somebody. I think that might also be an element of it too. Like there was a fight over what would be the interpretation, because there was a battle over what Christianity would be, both in North America. Both sides, North and South, were saying that God was on their side to either defend the institution of slavery and break apart from the Union, or to abolish slavery. Both were claiming God, but there were two very different ideas of Christianity at play. Same thing for South America too, or Latin America more broadly. You had different vying, competing ideas of Christianity, with Christians killing Christians. There was a lot of wars going on throughout the 1840s, 50s, and beyond. Paraguay was at war with its neighbors, and oh my God, it was a time of oligarchical manipulated war that capitalized on different types of Christians killing Christians. And, if the Confederate South had been successful, it's a fact that part of the objective after declaring victory over Lincoln and making your own confederation allied with the British was to then go on and take control of much of Latin America, Mexico, all the way down to the tip of Latin America. That was part of the objective of the slave power. So there was a big fight over like what would be the character of Christianity faced with that possibility as well. So I think that's another overlooked thing. And I say that this is left out because when I went through many museum websites, this was darkened out. So nobody could even see that cross was there, which I think is a big part of the heart of the Andes in Church's theme in this case. There's also a little city back there too. That's my hypothesis, at least. So again, back to the question of manifest destiny, the art of manifest destiny, the Humboldtian Schillerian art. Albert Bierstadt did the Emigration Cross in the Plains, featuring an idea that, the divine is calling forth civilization to go and pioneer, right? To go beyond the Alleghenies, to go beyond and explore, really, just leap beyond your limits to growth. So that's another. It could be done in many ways, but I think the way he worked the use of lights is just divine. It really does. You got, and he doesn't lose detail either. It's not just worshiping the divine. You got the animals doing their own little thing, drinking at the water well here. It's not romantic, but it's divine.
Yeah, it's
and another. What's that?
Just touching you. It's just touching you deeply, like without trying to explain. I feel there's something coming in my soul. So, c'est ça, c'est juste touchant.
Ouais, absolument. Ouais, exactly. Okay. Yeah, you're a sensitive soul. That's exactly it. It's just you can't even put it in words to a certain point, right? You can only go so far with it. Just like this, like it's so grand. And I mean, when you look at paintings of the Sierra Nevada mountains, they're photographs. They're beautiful, but they're not typically this degree of divine, right? This level of magnitude of grandiosity is not really something conveyed with the physical eyes. But Bierstadt is successful. He does it. There's a limit to what can be said other than just to take it in a little bit and appreciate the divine in nature. He obviously doesn't have an idea of a cold nature apart from human beings. And also he doesn't have an idea of the viewer as separate from the artist or his art, right? In the minds of people like Church and Bierstadt and Cooper, the artist, the creation by the artist of the product of the art, and the viewer experiencing the art are all part of one singular process, right? The creator, the created, and that which is creating. Human beings can be made to become more creative. We can become creators by a transformative experience if art is done and communicated to us in a certain honest way. So again, just beautiful use of reflection. And here's another very beautiful one that I think just has to be taken in just a bit here, right? It's grand. Looking down Yosemite Valley, 1865.
But I can't help but try to put words to what I feel as I see this and experience it with you, because I am seeing and feeling just this expansiveness that just completely overrides all those limits to growth that are trying to be imposed on us.
Yep. Agreed. Yeah. He loves Yosemite Valley, and Yosemite Valley in California is just grand. It is a glorious place. He paints it quite a bit. This is a Yosemite Falls. The Chuluk Yosemite Fall is the name of the painting. You have some pioneers here, some explorers putting some wood on the fire. And the balance between just human activity and the natural state of nature, the beautiful falls. It's a nice counterpoint. Again, the aerial perspective is very well used. So it puts you into the place, right? Not so much using light this time. It's more of a cloudy day, but still is able to get across a very authentic grandeur. Now, Bierstadt loved painting different native tribes, and the ones that he spent the most time with personally were the Shoshones tribe, who were also they were painted here in what's called Lander's Peak. It was named after the explorer that he traveled with, Captain Friedrich Lander, or Colonel Friedrich Lander, who led an 1859 expedition, which Bierstadt accompanied, assigned to chart out courses for the Transcontinental Railway, which would later become built. It would be finished in 1869. It was started in 1863 by Lincoln in the heat of the Civil War. And so they had to chart out what would be the best pathway. So Bierstadt was there working the terrain, doing topographical studies, but also as part of the diplomatic component. The diplomacy with the native communities along the way was also something that had an artistic component, right? The artists were the diplomats in many ways, just like Paul Robeson, as we've seen before, as a musician and actor and artist, was a cultural diplomat too, sent to China, sent to Russia, sent to various parts of the world, expressing beauty. So this is what Bierstadt was doing. And the challenge, just like von Humboldt understood, was that as we grow civilization and technological progress, as that grows in quality and also takes up more space, it will come into conflict with native tribes. It's going to happen. But just like China and Africa, or building the Belt and Road in Africa or in Xinjiang or in Tibet, it's going to happen that a more technologically advanced civilizational force will come into a proximity with a different civilizational force that is not as technologically advanced. And it's not like nothing is going to change. But the question is the change going to happen in an organic, loving way that entails the development and freedom of the souls of the people who preserve the best of their culture and participate in that co-creation process? Or is it going to be something that smothers them, that crushes these cultures and enslaves them for, under the altar of some material progress with no soul? That's the Davos sort of the Davos way of thinking about technological progress, is just, smite and create like a Borg assimilation of everything, or a crushing of those who don't wish to assimilate. That was what Andrew Jackson was doing with his idea of manifest destiny in the 1830s. So that, Bierstadt is constantly awakening in the understanding of his fellow white man, the humanity of the native communities, while at the same time he's teaching the chiefs of these various tribes to do painting. He's painting different. Here's another example of what he calls sunset light, painted in 1861, featuring other experiences with. I don't know if this is still the Shoshan tribe or not. I'm not too sure. But again, just featuring them in their day-to-day life. He's got dozens of paintings showcasing the soul in the eyes of different members of the native community. There's the last buffalo there on the upper right, a native woman from, I don't know which tribe. The other painting over there is actually not Bierstadt on the bottom right. It's somebody who was sponsored by Alexander von Humboldt by the name of George Catlin, who did also, Humboldt sponsored a lot of painters. And he did a lot of paintings of natives. He even organized bringing some natives over to perform some music for the King of Prussia in the 1850s, which is interesting. Now, just the last couple of paintings here. There's two paintings I wanted to end on for this component, and I'm going to keep pushing through here because there's a few more points of counterpoint I'm gonna say something about. But as far as the beautiful Hudson River School, Bierstadt did something called the Storm on the Rocky Mountains in 1866, and this is Mount Rosalie is what its subtitle is. But the Storm on the Rocky Mountains, and this is always the case with Hudson River School painters. Whenever they have a storm, it always means something. Whenever they're conveying weather, there's always a meaning. But you have to sort of put yourself vicariously into the position of somebody living in the world that they are living in 1866. In this particular case, Lincoln has just died, right? This is fresh in everyone's mind. You have the contrast of light that's always present. It's not just darkness. It's not like a Turner that's only painting a one-dimensional emotional state of darkness. But, you have, like always, it's a lot going on. It's painted in the same, and there's down below, I don't know if people could see, there's a certain teepee over there. There's a little mini village, probably a nomadic village. Obvious lake. A lot of elements I can't really make out because the resolution's too small. But we definitely have a situation going on here, right? Because the thing you're always looking for is anomalies. When you're looking at a painting using the Schillerian principles of classical composition, you're always looking for the anomalies, things that are created to capture your mind's attention that doesn't quite fit. Because what the heck is going on at the bottom center? Something weird is going on, right? You guys see it? Everyone's on mute, so I'll just talk. But feel free to take yourselves off mute. I mean, we don't have a huge group tonight, so if people want to just chime in at any point, they can do that. But basically, what you've got there is a situation of a horse, a renegade horse, and one native on a horse riding and two running on foot. Another horse sort of looking at the darker brown horse running in a certain direction. It's a point of concern, right? There's a certain emotional tension there, because where is that horse running? It's running to a cliff, right? That horse is definitely running to a cliff. What's going to happen? What does that mean? I don't have the full answer. but there's definitely meaning there. That storm, right? Those storm clouds, is the horse spooked by the storm clouds? Is the storm coming? Did it already pass? I think it's coming. So just hold that in mind, okay? Hold that in mind. And there's a little zoom in, right? Actually, I should have had this first. So just to get across, right? Got a little dog or something running alongside too. Mm-hmm. This horse is running in an opposite direction. Possibly trying to maybe rein this horse in. I don't know. This is a wild horse, doesn't have a saddle. This horse does have a saddle. This tree's been broken already. So you know what? As I'm looking at this broken tree, I'm thinking to myself, maybe that storm already did pass. Maybe that tree broke during the storm that passed. Right. We also have some deer back there running. Another deer, a couple of deers over there.
Off the cliff.
Huh?
Or some people already went off the cliff.
Dear God, maybe.
Well, I'm saying because the tree is crushed.
You'd have to be a really big giant to crush a tree. But no, I'm starting to think. I'm thinking my hypothesis is probably pretty solid. I think that tree he might have painted that broken tree because that storm has perhaps passed. You know, this is being painted in 1866, right? So that was a storm. If there ever was a storm in American history, that was it. That was the Civil War.
That's for sure.
So that was in his mind. So this painting, Frederick Church and Bierstadt were, like I said, close collaborators, close friends. Both were not armchair painters. They traveled to the areas that they painted. They really explored the world. And they featured these two paintings together on tour in New York and around the United States at the same time. This was also painted in 1866. It's called Rainy Season in the Tropics. Now, Pierre Baudry wrote a whole paper on this. I find interesting. I'm going to include it in the description box. I think that they're both the same size paintings. They both feature similar anomalies of contrasts. So the rainy season in the tropics, I mean, when the tropics rain, they really rain. The rainy seasons are on the two equinox periods of March and September. You have a double refraction rainbow there. That's a rare occurrence. It does happen sometimes when the sun is at a certain angle relative to the horizon at certain times a year. It's possible it happens. So you have a lot going on. Do you guys see? I mean, do people want to say their thoughts of what they see as anomalies, ideas that would attract the mind, big or small, in this painting?
Well, what I see on this picture and the one before is how the humans are small compared to the whole scenery. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All of the Hudson River School paintings feature, increase the magnitude of nature and place human beings within a broad, very, very large environment. That's very true. And there are humans in this.
Following the rainbow?
I don't know.
What about the color? The strong color red is strangely out of place in that scene in a way.
Yeah, it definitely captures my eye too. Yeah, that red is a common color used in the dyes of Latin America. So if you were going to feature somebody in Latin America, you know, red would likely be a color you'd pick, cadmium. But at the same time, you're right. I mean, he could have picked blue. He could have picked another color, but he picked red.
Just artistically, from a compositional standpoint, that seems to be definitely an anomalous point. That what they want you to look there.
Yeah, definitely wants you to look there. That's for sure. That's, I think, one of the big ideas in the painting. I would say also the. Go on.
I see that you have so much greenery on one side, and then you have just like the rocks. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's like no greenery there, so that strikes me.
Right, that strikes me too.
Yeah,
yeah.
I find it really otherworldly, the contrast.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, for sure. There's
getting to transcendence, maybe.
you got a high density of life. I mean, for sure, all of the Hudson River School paintings feature some quality of transcendence. But the contrast, you have rocks, low density life on the rocks, contrast with the life, the high rich colors, vibrant colors in the green zone where the people are down in the corner.
And always that mountain, you know, in the background, I always noticed that mountain way, you know, quite far off.
Yeah.
Very, you know, got my focus anyways.
Well, there's something interesting about that mountain, because you got to keep in mind, like I said, these two paintings were always toured together, right? So people would see them both at the same time, often at two sides of the room. When you go to Bierstadt's painting, I don't think it's a coincidence that he picked a very similar mountain for the background of the storm on the Rocky Mountains, right? You see that painting, the mountain up there, upper left?
Yeah.
Above the clouds. It's also an interesting thing. And they, you know, you got a different set of clouds. You know, you got more the cloud number 9, poofy clouds in this one. In this case, you know, the rainy season is going on, but you have the blue skies, again, contrasted with rainy season. So like rain, gray, that has obviously just come down. That ground where they're walking down here is shiny and wet, so that it has just rained, just finished. The rainbow is just coming out. Same thing here too, right? Like based on the analysis we made, these trees here have been knocked. This tree's knocked over. This one's been busted down. Rain, the storm has come. It's moved through. You have a mixture of light. Again, you have greenery, and you have high density life in the climate region of the Rocky Mountains, but it's high density life and photosynthesis contrasted with the rocky, low quality life, but still with moss on it that you'd see somewhat in sort of tundra environments, like in the north is where you tend to find that sort of type of life. Same thing here too, right? We got the moss growing on the rocks.
There's
water feature too.
Oh, sorry, Matt.
Oh, it's fine.
There's a thought coming in, like, you know, when you want to shoot, there's this the ring is really definite, and with the red, as Joanna said, that your attention is drawn to the red cap. I feel like it's someone shooting, like.
Oh, here, let's actually look closer.
Because of
here we go. Well, this is actually what it is. Can you guys see that? This is probably about the size you would actually see it if the painting were physically in front of you. It's that big. Now, what you guys see what's going on there? What do you guys see is happening in this painting, or in that little scene?
Are they traveling up the mountain?
Is one going one way, the other way?
Ah, well, here's the problem, right? What you have are 3 donkeys and 2 guys. The guys are obviously pulling the donkey, which is all 3 donkeys have their asses facing us. The guy wearing the yellow white shawl with stripes is pulling it, trying to pull it in another direction, right? The 2 guys are facing us, or the guy in the white shawl is facing us. The other guy is still trying to obviously move the donkey with his buddy. But the donkeys don't want to keep walking forward. Why don't they want to walk forward? Why, right? What do the donkeys know that the humans don't know? Do they perhaps have a prescience that the humans lack? Because the humans definitely want to walk towards us. Now remember the theme in this one, right? Not the theme, but remember that anomaly of the cliff and the humans and the donkeys, or in this case, horses, right? That in this case, the horse seems to have a bad instinct, in my opinion. At least one of the horses do.
Yeah.
In this case, I think maybe the donkeys might have a good instinct. I'm not sure. Because if you look at it, are they going to be walking through a little bit of low, like, is that a little pond that they're about to walk through?
Yeah.
Or, you know, like I see a reflection of both of the guys in the wet ground below them. Mm-hmm. I see, like, we all see the reflections, right, of the red shawl, and we see a bit of a reflection of the donkey. But is that really is that a pond? Or because I don't see a reflection of different parts of the Rocky Mountain in the same way, and the leaves on the Rocky Mountain I don't see reflected in it that way.
Actually, you're right. That looks like a pond.
It looks like a pond. I think the humans believe it's a pond, but I don't know if it's a pond, because I don't know if Bierstadt, or in this case, Church, would consciously avoid painting the reflections of the rock and foliage the way he could have in this area. Or maybe that pond, if it is a pond, is really not a safe pond. Maybe it's maybe more of a wet rock face. Maybe there's a bit of a slide down somewhere that could be very dangerous. Like maybe there's a visual ambiguity being created there.
It looks like a pond, like the way the reflection is. Like if it was just kind of like wet rock, it would look different, I think.
I don't know. I mean, there's definitely an ambiguity, that's for sure. Because why would the painter choose to paint these stubborn donkeys moving that direction? Why isn't there reflection of the other rocks on the side inside of this so-called pond, right? Like all of these rocks here should also be reflected just like these guys are. I don't see that. So there might be like a visual ambiguity created to just get the mind perplexed a little bit, thinking maybe about the precariousness of something.
So
Definitely
like it's going to flood. So like there may be a flood.
Well, flood. I mean, all of these things tend to express something bigger than the imagery per se. Like if you hold in mind like what's happening at this moment, on the one hand, you have the Civil Rights Act is coming into play that makes all human beings, native and black, all equal in 1866, April 9th. That's a big deal. That's the cause of like 100 years of fight manifesting finally in an actual bill that's overturning Jackson's policy. But at the same time, you have a restoration after Lincoln's murder of the oligarchy and of the deep state of the United States that is very visibly taking control under Andrew Johnson. So, you have a new war against Lincoln's desires for Reconstruction and against the idea of creating peaceful development with the respect of different cultures. That's all being undermined at this very moment. And these are not politically stupid people. They do have a like they've read the Bravo in a serious way. They have a much better political intelligence astuteness than than many artists of our current age. So things are just precarious. I mean, I would just leave it there. But there's a hope always. There's precariousness and there's hope. Precariousness and hope, right? There's no guarantee that horse is going to run over that cliff or that he's going to bring the people with him. Maybe that other horse is going to come in and turn the tide, right? There's no guarantee that this storm is going to come back, but it might. There's no guarantee that these people are going to be hurt, but they might. There's always a level of uncertainty, and that's the point of great classical drama or tragedy.
So can you go back to that picture real quick?
Was that last painting Church that did it, or Bierstadt?
This is Church.
Oh, this is Church, and then the other one was Bierstadt.
This is Bierstadt.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
So of course. So let's look at, what happened to the Hudson River School, because it wasn't long after these paintings that the Hudson River School was more or less destroyed. We don't see much of it after the 1870s. There's an art historian, an art critic, I should say, who published in 1880, observing this meltdown of the Hudson River School that had really endured for about a half century. And he wrote, the year 1876 to 77 may be said to mark the beginning of a new epoch. Before that year, we had what was called, at any rate, an American school of painting. And now the American school seems to have disappeared. We are beginning to paint as other people paint. So what is Brownell writing in Young Painters in America? What is he talking about? And here the figure one of many, but a very important figure of George Inness is very important. George Inness in 1873 becomes the president of the American Academy of Design. He had been trying since the early 1850s to become a member, and he was rejected consistently. He became a leading figure. He had certain technical skills that are indisputable. That's one example of his style and technique. You know, a guy sitting on a very nice fuzzy gray day with sun piercing through the foggy air. He became the representative of a school known as the Barbizon movement, which is a French school that had been led by a figure named Jean-François Millet, and Theodore Rousseau was another one in the early 1860s. This was founded, or late 1850s. He went to France. He fell in love with the Barbizon French mode of using light and atmosphere and painting just, you know, everyday objects. You know, getting over this illusion of the divine and just painting as you see it. Now, the expression that his movement took as it took control of the Hudson River School and American arts more generally, it became known as the Luminist movement. It had a certain branch in France, and what they did is they played with elements of the style of the Hudson River School painting, but they eliminated something very important in the soul of it. Now, this is one painting he did. The name, I forget it. I have it written down, but I've lost track of the names of my paintings. So I do apologize for that. Oh, maybe I'll find it after. Anyway. Oh yeah, it's called Tragedy at Sea, 1864. So just like Turner, he was often motivated by portraying paintings of despair on the sea. There's many of those. His son, Charlie Parker, who's an art historian, writes of this moment, or this change in American landscape painting. He says, at a time when his fellow Hudson River painters were searching for the most wild, untamed, and dramatic landscape subjects they could find, or sometimes combine an event, in the case of Frederick Church, George Inness chose to paint settled and cultivated lands, the farms and fields in which both God and man had made their mark. Inness started his career painting in a style in keeping with the other Hudson River School artists, but his trips to Europe exposed him to the artists of the Barbizon School of France, which changed his palette and approach. Inness eventually eclipsed the Hudson River School painters and was regarded as the finest American landscape artist. Now, this guy, Charlie Parker, loves Inness. And it's true, Inness is celebrated as like the greatest landscape artist, even though he is the guy who probably did the most to undermine the school of the Hudson River School. What is his style? Now, there are a lot of Inness paintings out there. You can Google, you could look at a lot of them. I will admit that a lot of them are very nice to look at, right? Some of them I think are a little bit horrendous, but many are very nice to look at. Many are inspired by J.S. Turner as well, who often does very interesting, novel things with light. In here, like I said, I lost track. We have one of these paintings here. This one, this one here on the top left is called Evening Glow. No, sorry, this one is Sunrise in the Woods. This one is Evening Glow. I forgot what the names of these two are. Now here, we got a guy who got what appears to be some hay on a farm area, bit of a tree with a lot of chiaroscuro. Sorry, Dave, chiaroscuro. So there's definitely some light dark play there. Very dreamy, right?
They're too blurry. They're too blurry.
They're very blurry. They're very blurry. Well, they're very dreamy, and that's sort of the purpose of a lot of the Barbizon or Luminist school, is to take some of the elements of like sfumato, the blur, that's something Da Vinci developed, and that's a very useful tool in painting, is blurring the edges, getting rid of the sharp contours. That's a very fine thing to do, where you can do some finishing or blur the backgrounds to cause some atmospheric, perspective. That's fine. Or even to accentuate the feeling of light. That's fine. You can do those things. But what they did is they took these technical components and then they made that the dominant feature of the paintings in order to convey intentionally a daisy dreamlike state, often with a focus on melancholy, right? Getting you sort of in a hypnotic almost feeling. Some other examples are, trees in winter near a city. You got some white above, some white below, some trees, sense of, some definitely a little bit of cadmium feeling. But I mean, what's this doing? What's the message? It appears maybe somebody's crossing the field, walking across the field. That's got to be tough, probably windy. But I mean, what's the transformative character of this? Considering, keeping in mind, this emerged within the context of a dismantling of the Hudson River School. There's one at the bottom left. I like this one, but again, it's still very dreamy. Some cows or whatever drinking a little boat, anchored on the side of this tiny stream. Some trees, all very dreamy. This one specifically. This one's called Gray Lowry Day, all by Innes. And Gray Lowry Day, pretty much means just gray, kind of a bummer of a day, dark day, some birds eating, nothing
So
really all that transcendental. Huh?
did it mark the decay of the American art?
Yep. Yeah, there was a sort of a change in trajectory. Let's just call it that. It was a definite change in orientation and morality embedded within the art. So what starts, just a couple other examples, right? There's actually some really good painters, like Sanford Gifford is a marvelous Hudson River School painter, very close friends with Frederick Church his whole life until Church dies. But Gifford, who paints these wonderful pieces throughout his life, this is one featuring himself painting a very beautiful landscape, right on the upper right-hand side. This is another one, just a really glorious painting. Maybe it lacks a bit of the divine of a Bierstadt, but it's still quite nice. As these paintings, like the Gray Lowry Day on the bottom right, break world records, it becomes the highest-selling painting at auction. So all of the Eastern establishment, opium trafficking, blue blood families of Boston and New York, who have always been at the heart of the deep state operations inside of the United States since the get-go, they start really pouring a lot of money and effort into buying up the art world and shaping the direction of what art is valued. And this thing sells for $10,000 back in like 1899, which today it's maybe not that much money. Back then you could buy a big house. It's a fortune. You could live for many years happily with $10,000. So this thing sells at auction. Now the one thing that happens, I'll see if I've got all of the paintings start, if you want to make money as a painter, all of a sudden you have to adopt this style. And everybody starts doing this style. Jervis McKenty is another Hudson River School painter who starts doing this style, and then they're making cash. But all of people like Bierstadt and Church and Asher B. Durant and others who are doing the inspiring stuff, their paintings are selling for maybe $40-50. They're being crushed financially. So
can you hold on right there? Go back one.
Yep.
And I think you were talking about the bottom right one at the time when you started talking about how they promoted them and they sell for these obnoxious amounts of money. The very mood of that is melancholy.
The very mood
and
is
just
melancholy.
This darkness hovering.
Yeah.
Or like the one at the top, it just makes me think of like walking through a desert and being parched with thirst.
Yeah, or just
And
being
it's
really
like
cold,
that-
right? Like this person's probably really cold. I think they're getting hit by wind in snow. It sucks. It's a crappy feeling.
But it's like they are elevating those emotions. And could you go back a few slides to the one with the rainbow in it? Just in everything you said about that, I can't help but see God when I see the rainbow, just because of the verse, after Noah's flood and they came out of the ark and God set the rainbow in the sky and it was a promise. So I can't help but see the promise and the presence of God in the rainbow.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so these guys are trudging up this mountain that looks all green and lush, and this is what we're going to head towards. And these rocks over here, these mountains over here, they look rather barren and like a rugged journey. But that just does speak to me of the actual journey of the soul and the journey to know God, traveling up the mountain of God. And it can seem like it's rather a barren wilderness.
Nice
and there's
thought.
not all these lush green things away that feed our sense perception, like Juan's always talking about. But it's that journey inward, and it's that journey to find God. But we'd rather just head for the familiar that looks more promising. And it's like, that's exactly what they did in the art. They suppressed the people that actually were putting inspiration for the journey.
Wait, just wait. It's going to get worse. So, but you have very good thoughts, very good thoughts. And just to showcase what I just want one example, but in the later part of Sanford Gifford's painting career, he dies in 1901. They all take on the luminescent Barbizon character. All of his paintings, they lose the what is visceral here, right? That he obviously has in his younger years. He capitulates as well, as do many of the Hudson River School painters, and they all start painting in this style of hyper fuzziness, kind of blue emotions, not a lot of edification. Now, George Inness Jr. was his son and wrote the biography of his father, George Inness. In it, I think it's something very interesting that Pierre Baudry brings up in one of his studies, this quote by his son talking about his father's method. And his father believed, well, here, I'll just read it. He says, it's like a formula, okay? He's like, there A, number A, like A, concept A, slam in a thundercloud in the right-hand corner, and then you B, rush a battery of light down that middle distance, and then C, keep hammering away at the foreground. Never mind if you are out of tone, we'll get a harmony when we put a glaze over the whole thing. And then with a little tickling up here and there with pigment, we will have finished the greatest landscape that ever was painted. And this is not all imaginary. Oh, sorry, this is the kid now. This is not at all imaginary, for that was one of my father's pet theories. He thought he could direct any man or group of men to paint in this way and produce as great a picture as he could paint himself. At times, he seemed to be obsessed with the idea that painting only a picture was a purely mechanical, needing only the master brain to direct. And he did do some very virtuoso things very quickly, but this is actually the origins of the school of Bob Ross. And don't get me wrong, I'd rather have people enjoy Bob Ross than, the Happy Little Clouds 30-minute painting guy. I'd rather have people enjoy that than watch the Grammys and enjoy Satanism, no doubt. But all that to say, there's a certain mechanical laziness that was infused into it, which was formerly a heresy, in the world of the rigorous, truth-loving Hudson River School painters that Inness was undermining. So, yeah, that's just a very interesting thing. Now, what's also interesting is that coming out of this luminist movement, the Barbizon movement in America, that's painting more emotions, that's painting more just it's got its own sort of character to it. You have, inversely, a controlled opposition movement also arising in the form of the Association for the Advancement of Truth in Art, aka the American Pre-Rafaelites. And these are all followers of the aesthetic theories of the anti-Schiller himself, John Ruskin, who are brought to America. And this is where it gets weird a little bit here. But you have people like John William Hill, who did a couple of these paintings, Cucumbers being one of them. And what it is like these are people who are saying, well, the movement is based on the Ruskin ideal that, look, there's too much flaky emotions that are not real. They're not true. And they create this hyper-realistic school, which is like, okay, let's do real pure detail. Let's focus on sensualism. Let's focus on the reality as if we were actually in a photograph. So 1860 Cucumbers is what's Cucumbers trying to communicate to the audience is cucumbers. Here's Landscape with Mountain by John William Hill. What is it? What is the idea that William Hill is communicating in this? It's a landscape with mountains. That's what he's communicating. He's being honest. It's truthful. Thomas Charles Farrer, View of Northampton, 1865. What is he communicating? View of Northampton. It's like, is there anything that's there to, create an ambiguity, a gap, a paradox that is awakening or kindling a fire of the universal inside of the hearts of the viewer? Hell no. That's antithetical to their movement, but their movement is being created or growing in contrast to the Barbizon school. Ferrer is
opposition.
Kind of, yeah. It's a false duality, right? A false dualism is created, and Mount Tom is another one, right? Guy fishing and a very realistic. It's nice looking. I'm not going to deny it's not nice looking. It takes a lot of skill. I'm not saying it doesn't take technical skill, but it lacks that certain something we've been talking about. And what's interesting about Thomas Ferrer is that he's directly a disciple of Ruskin. And he's working very closely with people like Dante Gabriel Rossetti, who's a very, very actually satanic pre-Raphaelite painter. They're all studying and trying to popularize Turner and Turner's method that we saw at the very beginning of this lecture. And this is one of his studies on the Temeraire, exploring Turner's original that he's doing in 1860. So even though he's creating these hyper-realistic things, he's also naturally, just like Newton or Descartes are these hyper-empiricist scientists who are also these Kabbalistic, numerological alchemists who believe in the mystical irrationalism of nature. They have this it's necessarily the case that if you're unnaturally too far weighed down by your logic, you will be susceptible to becoming a mystic, much like what Cynthia goes through in her study of Schiller's Ghosts here. How was the young German prince profiled and psychologically destroyed or depatterned because of certain imbalances he had in his heart-mind relationship, such that he could then become, by the end of that play, I'll just say it. I mean, you got to read it to actually appreciate it. It's actually a short story. He becomes essentially a fanatical mystic who has no sovereignty at that point, because he lacked a certain something he didn't figure out early on, which Schiller gets at. So people who want to solve that question I just threw out there, watch Cynthia's lecture and read Schiller's short story, The Ghost Seer. But this is the thing, right? These guys are dualists, leaping from extremes. Here's some more examples of hyper-realism of another, more pre-Raphaelites, Charles Herbert Moore, who's using, I think, more like color pencils to convey again, nice landscape. John William Hill, the Palisades, again, cows, peasants sitting there in the grass, not that different from each other, little castle in the background. Got William Trost Rogers, again, very realistic. He's very committed. I'm sure Humboldt would like his commitment to portraying the realism of plants and flowers, but overall as a composition, you got a little sun in there emitting no light. Kind of very very normal. But coming out of this, it's not a big leap from the Luminists to the early Impressionists. And I think Claude Monet, who's one of the most highly financially prized painters, who's masterful at color and light. Not saying that he isn't, right? Never these Impressionists never use black. They're always using different mixtures of color. They're very interesting studies, but they're studies. They're effectively what, if you were a Hudson River School painter, you see these sorts of things by Frederick Church and Bierstadt as well, but they're doing them in the form of quick sketch, like studies of light that will then be used later on in the laboratory, or I should say in their studio, to do something finished. But Claude Monet, one thing that's interesting about him is that he says, this is another piece that's sort of like a degradation of Turner. It smells of Turner, but it's even like more lazy. Called the Sunrise, probably sold for several $1 million. All of his pieces sell for like tens of millions. Now he says something interesting. He says 90% of the theory of Impressionist painting is in Ruskin's Elements of Drawing. I thought that was a very insightful thing, considering this guy is one of the godfathers of Impressionism. And Manet as well is influenced by the Ruskins, Holman Hunt and Fox Madox Brown, who are both British disciples of Ruskin's, who are part of the Pre-Rafaelite Brotherhood. That's Manet, and so Monet, Manet, not to be confused. But I mean, this stuff is everywhere, and I'm not saying that every Impressionist is bad. I'm not saying that, but they're being shaped by a cultural and aesthetic movement that a lot of these talented painters don't fully understand what it is that they're being swept up into, this invisible field. And the thing I didn't say before, oh yeah, here's a quick example. Just when I said, like, these painters like Thomas Cole or Church do these color and light studies. They do this in like 45 minutes. Now, bottom left is a study by Cole. Not too sure which one, what the finished painting is. Another one is a Church study on painting. If you zero in on these things, here's more studies by Bierstadt, Church. They're super quick. This is effectively, one could say kind of impressionistic, but that's just what they are. They're just part of a larger process. The Impressionists just sort of stopped short and didn't finish things in that sense. The one thing I didn't say about George Inness is that his son made a point that his father's entire life was controlled by some financiers by the name of Thomas B. Clark, who ran an art sales firm called William and Everett, and then also another art sales firm called Dole and Richards. And they had a contract where they pretty much owned. It's kind of like the pop stars working for record labels, As soon as they sign that contract, they're happy at first, and then they realize they've just sold their soul, because now nothing that they do is theirs, and they have to do everything that the studio wants them to do. That's what happened to the Hudson River School painting. Is this guy became president, and all of his paintings were owned by this Thomas Clark guy, and then one of his controllers and financiers was a figure named James Pinchot, who is the biggest lumber baron of America, doing clear cropping of forests. And Pinchot, he has a son by the name of Gifford Pinchot, and he names his son after Sanford Gifford. He's one of the big patrons and backers, but he's also funding the destruction of the Hudson River School from within. And his son Gifford, get this, born in 1865, he becomes the first director of American Forestry Services under Teddy Roosevelt. He's working with all of the New England transcendentalists, the Thoreau, Emerson, James Muir, who are all just trying to take control or redirect the energy, kind of like the Ruskinites are, into this thesis that human beings are a creature of destruction whenever we try to improve our quality of life through technological progress. Whenever we build a dam, whenever we build a railroad, whenever we build something to make life better, we're destroying nature. We're disassociating ourselves from God. That's their thesis of the transcendentalists, of Emerson, of Walden, his famous book of and it's essentially the same thesis of the Ruskinites, of James Muir, sorry, who becomes very influential around Teddy Roosevelt. And what does Teddy Roosevelt do with his forestry service director, Gifford Pinchot? Is they bring in the British imperial model of conservation. So just like, because the idea was always how we open up the West, right? Go West, young men, connect to China. That was always the idea, is extend back from the East all the way through to China and develop a brotherhood of mutual collaboration. That's what Gilpin was championing as the father of Manifest Destiny that I've written a lot about. He was also a big fan of von Humboldt and carried Humboldt's Cosmos. It was all about taking the best of Asia, the best of the West, and creating something more than the sum of its parts that would be capable of defeating empire. So that required the development of California, the development of the West, of the Midwest, and the Forestry Service under Teddy Roosevelt blocked it all off and basically said, all of this area, we're going to do like what the British did in India with the Imperial Forestry Department in 1876, where the British put 2/3 of the territory of India under protected conservation park land, which would not be allowed to be developed in any way that would benefit the people living in India. And the British oversaw 24 mass famines. That was an attack on industrial development. And it was an attack upon humanity more broadly. And that's what they brought in as their model into America, to say that all of the West is going to be the land that will be untouchable by industry or infrastructure. And we're going to encourage the Andrew Jackson policy of inducing the different native groups, the First Nations, into little reservation zones where they will be rewarded for staying in little, like these invisible concentration camps, and punished if they try to leave or join other parts of civilization. So that's part of this. This was done in Canada as well. So this is what was brought in. Now, one of the things that was done as well is that many of the Hudson River School paintings today, the majority, I would say, from what I've read, are either not available for anybody to look at, because they were pretty much bought up by the same oligarchs in Europe or North America. Like Pinchot bought 200 Sanford Gifford paintings, early Gifford, and put them in his basement, never to be seen again. And we found out later on that after his mansion was bulldozed, after he died in 1946, it was discovered that all of the Hudson River School paintings that he'd been hoarding, preventing from museums, preventing anyone to see, were bulldozed over with his mansion destroyed. God knows how many of these things have been absorbed into the oligarchical coffers and, things in Europe as well. I don't even know, but they've been completely removed from our consciousness. So there's a few that have survived, which is what we've looked at today, and there's other ones too, but a lot have been taken out. Now, we've looked at this laziness, this move toward laziness, melancholy, dark emotions, right? A fixation on hyper-sensualism. Let's review again. What does Ruskin say in his Stones of Venice is the ideal of great art? It's worth revisiting this. The most precious works, he says, of any noble painter are usually those which have been done quickly and in the heat of the first thought. Works thus executed are, of course, despised in the 1853 world he's writing in, on account of their quantity as well as their frequent slightness in the places where they exist. And he says they are too large to be portable and too vast and comprehensive to be read on the spot in the hasty temper of the present age. They are therefore almost universally neglected, whitewashed by custodians, shot at by soldiers, suffered to drop from the walls, piecemeal in powder and rags by society in general. But, which is an advantage more than a counterbalancing all this evil, they are not often restored. He, of course, sees restoration of paintings as being an evil. So when a painting is already half-assed and kind of ugly and disrespected, nobody wants to restore it, which he says makes it more real and pure and truthful, because it is, in its decay, natural. He says, what is left of them, however fragmentary, however ruinous, however obscured and defiled, is almost always the real thing. There are no fresh readings, and therefore the greatest treasures of art which Europe at this moment possesses are pieces of old plaster on ruinous brick walls, where the lizards burrow and bask, and which few other living creatures ever approach, and torn sheets of dim canvas in waste corners of churches, and mildewed stains.
This guy sounds like he's part of a vampire cult or something.
Yeah, well, yes, absolutely. Definitely a death cult. And I mean, again, this guy's ideal model of the best time of arts in human history is mid-13th century Venice. That's his thesis in the book, is we have to go back to like early 13th century Venice. And he specifically points to the moment of the consummation of the Fourth Crusade, which, as we know, was, one of the moments, and that was actually 1201, actually, I'm come to think of it. That was the moment when Venice overtook Constantinople, destroyed Constantinople by managing the Crusaders, of the 13th century, and got Christians to kill Christians for a few years, stole Constantinople's artwork, and took over all of the maritime shipping and other activities that the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, had formerly enjoyed. So that was like Venice's coup d'etat, where they became the center of global evil fully with maximum control, also over cultural and artistic policy. And that's what Ruskin wants to go back to. So that's interesting. And keep in mind as well, he points to the moment of the corruption as being the moment of the League of Cambrai that nearly annihilated Venice off the face of the earth. And I mean, you can see the examples, right, of just allowing this trajectory, tolerating this new orientation at the early 20th century, involved within the 20th century. These are just 3 different paintings, all called Decay, produced by different artists. One in the 1840s, one in the 1940s, 1960s, 80s, and I forget the last one. But I mean, you could just see the deconstruction of the minds and emotions and spirit of the people, the artists, and as well as the people who admire the art, who pay the money for ththese arts, for the fact that Mark Rothko, who paints a lot like the painting in the middle, basically big glowy squares is Rothko, sold for most recently $440 million at auction to some hedge fund manager, which completely artificially raises the value of that type of art, right? Jackson Pollocks are selling for hundreds of millions of dollars, splattered paints that they've proven that like algorithms put into robots that randomized algorithms splattering paint can do something which great art connoisseurs can't detect as being different from a Jackson Pollock. So this is the sort of thing which has been artificially calibrated through the pursuit of money and the increasing misanthropy in the zeitgeist. So I'll end it here. Last thing, and it gets worse. I mean, I took some timid. These are some tame paintings. Obviously, people can imagine how bad it can get. Friedrich Schiller, just to point out here, the artist, it is true, is the son of his age, but pity for him if he is its pupil or even its favorite. Let some beneficent deity snatch him when a suckling from the breast of his mother, and nurse him with the milk of a better time, that he may ripen to his full stature beneath the distant Grecian sky. And having grown to manhood, let him return, a foreign shape into his century, not, however, to delight it by his presence, but terrible, like the son of Agamemnon, to purify it. The matter of his works he will take from the present, but their form he will derive from a nobler time, nay, from beyond all time, from the absolute unchanging unity of his nature. Here, from the pure ether of his spiritual essence, flows down the fountain of beauty, uncontaminated by the pollutions of ages and generations, which roll to and fro in their turbid vortex far beneath it. All right, that's it. That's class.
Excellent.
Bravo.
Can I just say one thing though? I really like Turner. I find there is an
come on.
painting, and I think I'm trying to kind of catch that awe that he actually captures. Okay, and maybe it could be destructive, but I'm thinking of this is a biblical teacher, Darrell Johnson, and he's was a physicist. His father, they grew up in the Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project, but his father described the first sighting of the atomic bomb. when they tested that and he says just the awe, like it's even so destructive, but yet this feeling he couldn't describe. And I just sort of thought, looking at Turner, he kind of caught that the atomic bomb, and I think to witness that, and his father never forgot that experience. But of course, just before his death, he regretted that he ever got involved. But that type of feeling, I think Turner really captures that. And so there is a,
yes.
I know.
No, Toby, I hear you. Yeah, he does.
It's real.
Yeah, there's definitely a real feeling of appropriate, authentic terror over what humans can do in Turner. It's true. But what else is there? Is there that positive, edifying other thing that showcases what we can do that makes us lovable and good? Do we see examples of that in Turner's works? I guess is what I'd be.
Yeah, I understand that, but I was just saying, I mean, getting back to Turner, because I've always liked that, the feeling he evokes. But but of course, those other the Hudson River painters, like, it's just to be able to have an exhibition. I mean, it must be absolutely awe-inspiring to be in the presence
there's
of
some beautiful,
that kind of painting.
Yeah, there's some amazing paintings that Cynthia and I have had the privilege of seeing in Boston and in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian, as well as at the Met in New York, which are, you can see some of these Hudson River paintings up close, and it's just extraordinary. I really recommend it if people have the ability to either go to Boston or New York or Washington and check some of these out. It's just mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, I know. And they kind of, I wonder if the group of seven had any influence from this Hudson River. You want
to see something cool on that point? Yeah, you want to see something really cool? I'm gonna do a screen share. Okay, you ready? Hold on 1 second. Just bear with me. Okay, it's gonna be worth your 10 seconds of waiting. Okay. Hold on. I'm just typing something into my browser here. Second. It's coming. Okay, here. So I got up in the browser. Now I gotta do a screen share. Okay, 1 second. Screen share. Okay, you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's an article. It's going to be unpacked a lot more, called "How the Hudson River School of Canadian Painting Was Suffocated by Zeus." And it's like a good addendum to this class, because there's this character I didn't talk about who's like he merits almost a whole presentation. He's an African American, well, half black. His mom, I think, was his dad was Scottish. His mom was a former black slave, I believe. Robert Scott Duncanson. And Duncanson is a leader of the Hudson River School at that time in the 1850s, 60s, 70s. He's very close with Bierstadt. There's a couple of examples of his paintings. Something at Pompeii.
Beautiful.
Yeah, really gorgeous. A bit low res, unfortunately. Here's, oh wait, that's actually mislabeled. Yeah, another one here. Senior Auerbach, studies in Europe. So really extraordinary guy. Land of the Lotus Eaters, based on a Lord Alfred Tennyson poem, which has a little polemic in there as well, as an attack against certain racists. Anyway, that's a whole class to unpack. So why is he's an American, and he's in Canada, and he goes to Canada during the Civil War. He's here for 3 years, and while he's here, he doesn't waste any time. He's basically carrying out counterintelligence. We all know Montreal is the center of Confederate intelligence operations. People like George Sanders is based in Montreal, coordinating terrorist attacks against Lincoln from the north. A lot of Anglo-Canadian intelligence with the Confederates that are working together. for those who don't know, George Sanders is the American ambassador to Britain under the Franklin Pierce administration, where his mansion becomes the center of organizing for the Mazzini networks, who are working to create with Ruskin the weaponization of young romantic mobs in different countries: young Albania, young Europe, young Germany, young France, young Bolivia. Simon Bolivar comes out of this. And in the Young America branch is a northern branch under this guy named Ralph Waldo Emerson, and in the south under Albert Pike. And they each have their own character, but they're pretty much designed to fulfill the same thing, which is like undo republicanism and restore this idea of nature worship, and just like live, or at least living in a medievalist type state where you have an elite that know their role and the masses are happy being little peasants. Anyway, he's up here in Canada for 3 years, and what's he doing is he's creating a new school of painting, and he's organizing the best talent like Alan Edson, a Canadian painter who's his direct pupil, who starts painting these wonderful pieces portraying Canada in a way that I've never seen portrayed before. The Pike River in Ontario, this is a sketch, a color study. Beautiful piece called Solitude. Very nice. It's not like Bierstadt level stuff, but it's really good. Autumn on the Yamaska River. CJ Way is another one who's conducting these incredible pieces of work with his own style. But again, very grand pieces are being delivered. So yeah, CJ Way, super good there. And so it's essentially a northern branch of the Hudson River School, Untamed Landscape. Yeah, that's kind of nice. Is cropping up. Here's another one, The Valley. Again, it's a watercolor sketch or watercolor painting, but again, very grandiose. I think it's British Columbia. And there's so many. Lucius O'Brien is great. Look at this sunrise on the Saguenay River in Quebec. Gorgeous stuff. Very much reflective of a Bierstadt influence. So anyway, you got a lot of these things. Otto Reinhold Jacobi is another one. So many. But then something happens. Oh God. As you can see, I put a lot of paintings on for people to look at, and you click on each one, make it bigger, take some time looking at them. That's a color study. Anyway, so what happens? What happens is just in parallel to what's going on with the Pre-Rafaelite takeover and the Barbizon takeover of the Hudson River School and this new false dualism in America, in Canada, you have also the creation of a new aesthetic movement of interpretive emotions and symbolism taking over increasingly, which a lot of money from the what become the Eastern, the heirs to the family compact, the oligarchs of Canada who are always loyal to the British, who end up managing like George Parkins and Vincent Massey later on from the Hart Massey family trust, who becomes the head of the Canadian Roundtable movement. They end up pouring tons of money into the creation of what becomes the Group of Seven. Unfortunately, the whole Group of Seven is artificially created, and they create a new artistic climate whereby symbolism, emotional interpretation become the new ideals of art, devoid of any type of idea of the sublime as Schiller expresses, or the Hudson River School, or those Canadian Hudson River School painters. And either the Hudson River School painters of Canada leave Canada because they just can't survive here anymore, and they go to America, like C.J. Way, or they succumb, like so many of John Kensett or Gifford or John Casselier is another American Hudson River School painter who succumbs and becomes a luminist painter. So it takes on different characters, whether it's, the American zeitgeist has a different profile than the Canadian zeitgeist. So they have different flavors but in all cases, they do the same thing. There's one guy who's really stands out, and he was probably killed, who's not part of the Group of Seven, Thompson, who Jerry has taught me and has shown a sufficient proof in my mind that Thompson he's categorized as the 8th member of the Group of Seven, who dies in a mysterious canoeing accident. He just like goes out to go fishing and just dies, right? Like, and his body shows up 5 weeks later. But he was doing something very different. That's not in conjunction with the other group of 7. That's the story that Jerry has to tell. He's done more work on it than I have, but I find it fascinating.
Oh, Emily Carr too.
She actually, I'm sorry to say, she seems to be part of the operation. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, Juan.
Well, I have to leave, so I wanted to thank you. I learned a lot, and have been. I've been looking into these artists and this art, not so much the artists, the art, for quite a number of years, and so I've learned a lot, and fits into some of the things that I've come up with lately as well in terms of my philosophies, which are changing rapidly. But I would like to say something about, and reiterate. You mentioned it, that what we see on the screen is, we can't understate how consequentially unlike the paintings it is. Like, to be in the presence of those paintings is a totally different experience than seeing them. It doesn't matter. I've got a 27-inch monitor here, and it doesn't matter what the highest resolution image is. It looks nothing like the painting. So those, I've been lucky enough. I've been to Boston, Washington, New York, Buffalo, a number of other places, and I've seen a few of those paintings of Bierstadt and Moran and Church, and they're just, I mean, the word sublime is inadequate sometimes for the feeling you get when you actually are in front of one of these damn things. They actually look like they're emitting light or something, and you don't really get that when you see it. I've got a few books, and a picture that's this big does not give you the feeling of a 6-foot painting. So it really is worth looking at them if you ever get a chance to. I mean, you can kind of get a sense of it when you see an image, but when you actually get to experience the painting, that is the real art, as opposed to the fake world. And this is a fake world, and so it's always great to engage with the real art. And anyway, I do have to go. Thank you to everyone. And thanks, Matt. That was really, really terrific. I'm now looking at your article here from 4 years ago now on the Canadians. And that's a really interesting point. People are so enraptured in Canada with the group of 7, say, that's all they know. And there are so many good artists out there historically from Canada. Well, maybe not so many, but there's lots, and we don't know about them. They just aren't.
No, I was super surprised. I just had this book on Canadian painting, and I was just trying to find some anomaly, and I'm like, okay, all of a sudden on one of the pages they spend like 3 paragraphs talking about like because it's like the start of Canadian painting is really the group of 7. That's like the current gospel or standard model of how you're supposed to frame your thinking about our history of painting. And then at the very beginning, they're like, the prehistory, there was like this guy who started this thing. His name was Robert Scott Duncanson, African-American painter from America, from like Tennessee. And it's like he started a school, but it didn't really take off. And then they just stopped talking about it. I'm like, what the hell? What is this? What is there more to that story? And sure enough, yeah, that's where the whole Civil War comes in. Intelligence operations in Canada come into play. The photography, because photography was like a branch of optics and science back, in those days. It was a brand new science, a lot of chemistry involved, right, to do photography. And so he got a job working at the same place, the Nottingham photography studios, where all of the Confederates were getting their pictures taken. And he was able to pass himself off, as many of these artists were, as somebody who's just like a colorist, coloring the paintings and just listening in on their conversations, getting intel. And that's what you find that Benjamin West is doing as well, the American painter who's running the British Academy of Fine Arts. The Royal Academy of Fine Arts is being run by an American from Philadelphia who's friends with Ben Franklin, a Republican, between like 1772 all the way to like 1810. And that's what he's doing. He's a court painter. He's great. So on the one hand, he's like trying to actually shape and uplift the culture of, Poison Britain in the heart of the beast, which is courageous. and he's just so good, that people can't deny. They're magnetically pulled into his awesomeness. But at the same time, he's getting intel, right? He's having conversations with lords, with elites, with British intelligence people, with the king who likes him, and he's able to convey this to Ben Franklin, to the Americans, as part of the international web of intelligence. And he's an artist, so he can get away with being everywhere, and same thing for Alexander Humboldt. He's invited into the courts and other things because he can go to Russia, and he does. He goes to Siberia and charts out like mines and different things for Siberia as part of the Russian Manifest Destiny policy of the East. That's what he's doing under Tsar Alexander I. And he's like getting intel everywhere he goes and sharing it with, his co-thinkers, co-conspirators. So all of these guys are doing most of them are doing that sort of thing on varying degrees. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
And their art's amazing to boot, which is great.
I look forward to more. Thank you very much. I do have to go.
All right. No, of course. Thanks for coming. Bye.
All the best.
You too.
But we have to appreciate the group of seven for giving at least a Canadian identity in art. Like, you see the group of seven and distinctly that's Canadian art compared to American, European. I appreciate in that way the group of seven. Even though,
Tommy, I mean, you know me. I'm not that impressed with what's shaped the Canadian identity for the past century. Just because it shaped us doesn't mean we should like it. We could have been better. Why weren't we shaped by something better? Why were we shaped by that?
Well, I could see in what you were describing, especially in this last portion, like when I first started listening to Rising Tide Foundation lectures and learned about Plato, and I had not really been exposed to that much of this stuff before, I could see how over time they suppressed the ideas of the real philosophy that he was teaching. That, like Quan Lee describes the real epistemology, the real development of the soul that Plato was teaching. And when they elevated Aristotle instead, then you get into the type of philosophy that is just this intellectualism that keeps you running around in your head, but there's really no growth, no progress to it, but everybody thinks they're really sophisticated. And then that brings in the discussion of the school of sophistry. So like our politicians today are so well trained in talking out of both sides of their mouth and saying nothing. And that's what philosophy became in the way that they suppressed Plato and yet elevated Aristotle. And now you're showing the exact same thing in art. I can't retain the names because I'm not that educated in this, but what you're showing from the Hudson School had so much inspiration behind it. And these artists were literally putting their soul into their work. And that's what Juan was just talking about. To be in the presence of that painting, you are engaging with their soul and everything that they were trying to express in that painting. But then for that to be co-opted and these other artists to be elevated, it just brings you into a very shallow place, and it's chaos and confusion and just running around in your emotions, and there's no inspiration and there's no growth and there's no remembrance of seeking what is sublime and what is divine. It's just gross. Everything they touch, they turn to trash.
Yeah, it's the anti-Midas touch. Yeah. Someone should write a story of Midas's cousin who turned everything to trash that he touched. Dave, you got to do a story on that, Dave.
The Hudson River painters, they all show in all their paintings. I noticed they want you to see beyond what they're painting. They maybe they put stuff in there that they want you to see, but they also formulate it in a way where they want you to see beyond the horizon, like what's past the mountains, what's behind the trees. where those newer paintings you were showing, there was like this fog, this haze that it was more like a snapshot. It's like what you see is what you get. And there was no room for imagination where, yeah, the Hudson River painters, it just made you want to, like, almost like that pioneering spirit, just to see beyond the horizon, you know?
Well said. Yeah.
Give you a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yearn for just it awakens that hunger for the beyond. Whereas, yeah, the other school kind of is like an opium den. Like it kind of like pacifies you the way the Chinese got pacified under opium. Everything just becomes this foggy phase of just like, you know.
Well, to me, it's just like turn away. There's nothing to look at there. It's not enough. It's just not enough. You know what I'm saying? No wonder people are not, or most people are just not really interested in art. I mean, I can find nicer things at the Pottery Barn or any of these other box stores. It's crazy. So bad. I mean, that's how bad I think that stuff is, that blurry stuff.
It's interesting because there's a statement that I totally agree with you. Yeah. But the John Ruskin at one point, because he co-founds several things, all devoted to creating different cultural movements to oppose industrial civilization and return back to a time of like pure, you know, medievalism, guilds, like, you know. And one of the movements he creates with this guy, William Morris, is called the Arts and Crafts Movement, which, and he wants to integrate different aspects of the arts under like one thing that's tied to the moral education of every subject that would grow in the land. He says should have universal right to an artistic culture. Sounds all nice, right? Sounds really okay. Yeah. And I mean, arts and crafts, I did that in school, you know, it's fun. You get to play with paint, finger paints and glue and ceramics, and it's fun. But the objective, he says, is I don't want to make the carpenter an artist. I just want to make him a happy carpenter. And the brilliant sophistry is that they realize that everybody has a creative spark, a yearning to express oneself musically, artistically. It's there for all people. Now, he recognizes it in opposition to the utilitarians that just want to turn people into automata or automata. I don't know how to pronounce that. But he wants to confine and control it so that you can create personal, like, mini cultures, right? Like you get this like art therapy, or like everybody can have their own little mini cultural mediocrity of just expressing yourself. And then you'll go back to work as a plebe, you know, doing repetitive things, and you'll be happy because you've just expressed yourself. But it's like it's a sophistry, right? It's a trap, because it's like, well, why don't we all aspire to excellence? Why do we all have to sort of like, you know, reduce ourselves to just having little micro creative experiences? Why can't we go beyond and become qualitatively, you know, excellent, all of us? So that's his thing. And William Morris, again, is working super closely with Mazzini, the Young Europe movement, with Engels. He's partying at Engels' house. You know, it's the center command structure organizing various revolutionary insurrection movements in Russia. London is the center for all of these things. And Engels is like behind this. People say it's Marx. No, Marx didn't know what the hell's going on half the time. It was like Engels was the guy sort of like managing the whole thing, kind of like Thomas Huxley was to Darwin, or as Ruskin was to Turner. You know, Darwin and Turner didn't know what the hell was going on half the time. They had these handlers who would speak for them and would be their promoters and bulldogs.
That's what we have now, handlers. Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah. So they didn't actually earn anything on their own merit. It was it's all politically sort of driven. And again, the other thing too is the Young Working Men's Association. So you got the John Ruskin is also co-founding with John Stuart Mill the London Working Men's College, which he's teaching at before he goes and teaches at Oxford. And he has a whole manifesto for it on medieval art. That's its manifesto. But this becomes the International Working Men's Association in the 1860s. What is that otherwise known as? The First International, the First Communist International, run by Marx. So that's directly tied to this whole like Ruskin network. Now, it just so happens, ironically, that there were good people captured within it who were able to like navigate against the more satanic, Trotskyite, Bakuninite, really bad poison, and were able to, as good human beings who were, secondarily communists, they were able to like go and do good things in Russia later on. But that's just part of being human, it's not a formula. It's got this indeterminate quality about it. But it is part of that history, and it is directly tied to these nasty characters.
I tell you what, the world just got smaller, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying? It's a real small world.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is just so interconnected. It's amazing. You really, I tell you, Matt, you and Cynthia, fantastic. It gives me such joy and hope. All the things that I get to, I'm learning now. I'm just, and I've been reading your recommendation of Graham, the untold. Yeah. Fantastic. But just to know that this has been going on forever, and it's just this back and forth and this polling, and I mean, I know, but it's hope. I mean, it's great.
Yeah, there's this overarching trend towards progress. It's just, it's a long time coming.
Yeah, Well, I'm trying to, everything I learned is trying to, spread.
That's great. Thank you, Helen.
I really agree with what you said, Helen. That is one of the biggest things is Rising Tide Foundation. Reading Matt and Cynthia's work has really given me hope in just the human spirit to continue to rise above this ickiness that they keep trying to impose on us. We will overcome.
I love Dasha's statement. I didn't know paintings could be this cool. I just noticed that.
Yeah, because I mean, the only thing that the broad crowd knows that I used to be a part of, I guess, before this lecture, Picasso and other stuff, which is kind of, you look at it, okay, fine, it's beautiful. But then you're kind of just like, okay, this is impressionism and other sort of fancy stuff that kind of like teaches you nothing, like edification, I guess. But what I saw today was really something really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I got it. I learned something today too. Yeah.
That's cool. I went to art school too. Oh, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, Dasha. You keep going.
Nah. Okay. I wanted to ask, are you and Cynthia kind of an counterintelligence or whatever?
I think anybody who does this sort of thing, if you think this way, I guess kind of, but that's just part of being human, right? It's not like you're part of an organization.
They fight bad guys.
Yeah, like you end up exposing bad guys when you know how the bad guys think, and you try to help other people understand that way of thinking so you can stay on top of it. And if you don't know exactly, it's like you plant the seeds, you scatter the seeds, and you have to have faith that they will take hold, and some won't, and some won't. And hopefully certain people who are in a position to do something with a bit of power might take some of that knowledge and do something with it and not fall for a trap, or maybe make the right decision where they would have otherwise made a stupid decision. So you just repeat, amplify, try to get better at it. If you call it counterintelligence, sure, why not? I don't know.
Well,
we need one of those memes that people are making today. We need you and Cynthia in your superhero costumes.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, that's why we're all here. We all want to, I think, at least I do. I want to learn something so I can help make the world a better place. And
that's the right idea.
I think that's the whole, all these rising tide people. That's what we're doing. I would imagine.
We're trying to imagine too. Yeah. We don't exactly know nobody knows. There's no magic wand, but we know as a process what's the right thing to do. So got to make it contagious.
Yeah.
Ironically, it helps to not overthink.
Ironically, yeah. but you still want to think a lot.
Do the good. Well, yeah, think about doing the good, but you don't have to overthink it if you're doing in whatever form it takes.
Yeah, there's
But the thing about
the higher voice, of course.
Yeah, like how do you, if you try too much, the idea, the living part of the idea can get stiff. It's kind of like that when you're painting, right? When you start with a sketch, and the sketch is usually very spontaneous. So like Ruskin is tapping into something true when he says great art is spontaneous, because it's true. Like that's when you're like in the heat of the moment, you're not overthinking it. You know, it's more of a living thing. And I noticed this oftentimes when I would paint. You start like then going over, you'd render it, you'd start putting more form, more shadow, more light and shade, you put some color in, you start doing some layering, and it starts getting stiffer and stiffer and more formal, and you're like, it's not as alive as it was in this sketch. And so to be able to keep that living process, because you're overthinking it, right? It's like the fun part was at the beginning, and then all of a sudden it's just now like, okay, I'm thinking about what paint is going to go where, and I'm thinking now too much, and it dies, it crystallizes. But the Hudson River School painters and great painters all over the place are always figuring out how do they keep that spirit alive as much as possible, even throughout the finished stages. So they're rigorous, but it's still free. And I think, isn't that what Beethoven even said about his, when he described his own method of composition? He was like, it's as rigorous as it is free. So you don't want to sacrifice.
But when it starts to get stiff and you realize you're overthinking, doesn't it work to stop and take a step back and rest for a little while?
Yeah, you got to stop.
And then when you come back to it, aren't you able to find that flow of life again?
Oftentimes, yeah, you got to just get into a different mind space and return to the problem. And well, that's sort of what Einstein and Planck both described in their scientific method, right? When they would reach a logical block that they couldn't overcome in mathematics, in some scientific problem they were trying to solve, they would go to the piano and the violin. They would play a little bit of Mozart. They would get into a different spiritual space, so that when they returned to the problem, all of a sudden they had a vitality that allowed them to have these bursts of insight that were not mystical or magical, but it was just a more health. They watered the plant, you know, and they were then more potent at performing a creative leap that needed to happen to generate a solution concept. So yeah, you're just getting out of it's different for everybody, but yeah, it's always just don't overforce it. That's for sure.
Well, I don't know what mystical and magical means to you, because I think it is mystical and magical. I think it is the flow from the human spirit. And then sometimes our rational mind takes control of it a little bit too much. And that's when we kind of got to back off and rest and refresh ourselves. And then when we come back to it, it's a flow from the spirit again, I think.
That's a healthy way to think about it.
I just think sometimes people make like Matt, because yeah, you said mystic before. Esoteric and occult is different from, let's say, the mystical. You know, like Nicholas of Cusa, sure. It's called mystical theology. Like that's literally what he calls it. You know, because it's above just like you know, dogma and just like kind of, it's really kind of getting in there. So yeah, there's always that deeper. The mystical reality is not far from the scientific notion of the universe, in that both recognize there's a unity, right? There's a transcendent sort of whole that encompasses everything. So whether it's a mystical or scientific, it both have the idea of a unity and a cosmos. Now, of course, the details is where it gets tricky, right? The bad guys will be like, yeah, totally. And then introduce nefarious things, whereas the other one is that healthy, whoever just said it, you know, where you kind of go to something, you come back and you keep trying. But also, like, it's true that a lot of these painters are like, they'll abandon stuff, right? Like sometimes something is, we had an idea, but it changes, or like it's not actually the same thing, and it's okay to let it go too, right? Like Socrates talks about the wind eggs. And I think the bad artists or people who are maybe just a bit more blocked or stunted emotionally, and they could not be, right? But they'd have to change certain things. They want to finish it. They want to make, you fall in love with your work. And that's not a good thing either. So yeah, there's all sorts of, I feel there's like bad habits that it helps for us to be aware of. And it's like, okay, that's a bad habit. And as we become freed from these kind of bad habits, the flow only gets stronger, right? The flow becomes more a deciding factor. We have a plan, but our plan becomes more and more that there's like a higher plan, and that's always just going to be there. And we make a plan with the assumption that there is, there's just many things we don't know. And part of the magic is letting that sort of happen. We'd be less effective if we couldn't, if we didn't take that into account, right? And we tried to make everything kind of work a certain way. Doesn't necessarily pan out.
No.
Got to go with the flow.
Exactly.
The flow must become strong. Must become. Yeah, my computer is going to die. It's probably.
What you focus on gets stronger. We learned that from quantum physics.
What?
What you focus on gets stronger.
Oh, what you focus on gets stronger. Yes. Right. Yeah.
Except the catch here is that you have,
right?
Except the catch here is you have to focus on not focusing.
Yeah,
but it can be done.
That's I hope some of these paintings will stimulate the imagination and that sense of concentration and rigor, because these guys were able to they had to beef up some muscles right before. They couldn't just go from 0 to 1,000. They had to sort of like capacity build, and they had to work on some metaphysical muscles that involved enduring, building up concentration span, which occurs through a faith, a devotion in a work which is good, which you have faith in, knowledge is good, and memory builds up in that process when you give yourself tasks that are tied to something good, and you develop powers that you can then add to and build upon later on the more you get the ball rolling. And at first, sometimes it's hard to get the iron, hot, and when you're making a weapon, or you're making anything, right? It takes a while for that cold metal to get hot enough to start molding it. But when the heat starts, at a certain point, it becomes much more malleable. And it's like that with the creative process too. The more you do it, the more you feed it, the more natural it becomes. The less you do it, the harder it is to get. It's like going to the gym too, right? Whatever. I don't go to the gym very much, so I'm a hypocrite. But I know that this is true. The more you get into the habit of going to the gym, the easier it becomes. The more you start liking it. Whereas at first it's a bit hard. So whatever the case may be, whatever our passion is, we have to find it, feed it, get better at it, and work on the imagination. So we're imagining, like you said, that what you get better at what you focus on. So give your mind over to good thoughts and work on them, get better at them. Dasha's raising her hand. I was about to close it up, but yeah, Dasha, what's up?
Sorry, I wanted to ask a question. It really bothered me that when you were presenting those walls of text in your presentation, it really bothered me that it's just it's hard to comprehend. Is that also you have to train that to be able to comprehend information of this level of complexity?
Yeah, you have to train it. There's ways of doing this. We should have a conversation, but you have to sort of give yourself specific. Do you use to-do lists, Dasha? Just out of curiosity, like do you wake up and do you have like a little to-do list that you check off of things you want to accomplish?
Yeah, but like a lot of the stuff gets ignored on it. So
okay, so the thing is, there's a lot of technical things that are useful. They're not the full solution, but good habits, like whatever you put on a to-do list, make sure it's doable and that you do it. So you like, that's number one. Like I've become like religious to, if something's on my list, it has to get done. So you hold yourself sort of like a referee accountable to yourself.
Just don't put too much on the list.
don't put too much on the list. 'Cause it becomes a wish list,
Right.
and then you disappoint
Well,
yourself,
that's
right?
doable.
Exactly. So you put little things, but you put things you can accomplish.
Exactly.
And you always reserve a few big things that you don't whip yourself if you don't get them done. Like, let's say I want to do for me, I might want to do an original essay on something I'm not qualified to do, so it would require a lot of work. I might not get it done, honestly. I'm not going to kick myself in the ass. I might get it done, but it might take me a long time. I might stay on my secondary to-do list for a while before it gets done, but it'll get done. The thing though is you want to make sure that you do things that are going to have a longer term payoff. So like Telegram, social media, things that hurt the concentration span, like things that are really interesting, but don't let you just linger with a thought for a long time. Minimize that. Like, reserve blocks of your day where you allow yourself to go into that land. I know I have to do this better myself, because I often I wake up in the morning, I could waste 2 hours scrolling a Telegram. You have to reserve the time, put it away on a side, right? And then not allow yourself, because it's a bit of an addiction. Our brains are wired. We've got chemical endorphins feeding our brains to go into social media land and get interesting videos. We have to fight it first. It's hard at first, but what you do read, you have to give yourself certain things like Plato. I would say number one, how much have you read a whole Plato dialogue yourself? Just sat down and just read Plato, and have you done that?
There are a lot of books that I haven't finished, and I've never read a book because it's so boring.
Okay. So here's the thing. Plato writes these fun little tiny dialogues, small. You can get through them pretty fast. They're not easy bubblegum reads, but they're great.
Matt, Juan is going to be
mind will
leading.
go like, what's that? What's that, baby?
Juan
Yeah.
is going to be leading a Plato reading.
That's a great point. Next week, Quan will begin to lead a weekly reading of Plato. So that'll be a great thing if you're able to join that living process and talk to Quan, and because it's a good thing to do it with a group of people too. It's okay by yourself, but it's the best when you're with a few people who are all confused, and then you could talk, So try to make that Wednesday night thing on Plato. Cynthia and I might not be there for all of them because we're going to be traveling for 5 weeks, but Quan will be there, and Pascal might be there, and Dave might be there. So do that. But I would say try to sit down, and when you're reading, the way what makes Plato so good is he's like he's taking your mind for a journey into paradoxes. So he really appreciates your mind, and he's setting up things so that your mind is going to be in the best place to make a discovery. And what you want to do is have a notebook, ideally a nice looking notebook that you don't like, because I find that I pay more attention to what I write in my thoughts if the notebook is a nice looking notebook. If I spend like $20 on a book, like a notebook, I'm gonna respect my thoughts that I put in it more than if I go to the dollar store. So, but that's a side note. But take notes, and as you're reading Plato, write your questions down, because he's gonna make you think of questions. Write them down, and write down possible answers, because he's gonna make you hypothesize things. So write those down, and that way you're building a relationship, you're building muscles to your mind, reflecting on paradox and solution formation. It's a lot of that, a lot of that going on, and you're going to find it easier to do things that are heavier lifting over time. But Plato is really important. I had to spend a long time reading Plato, and that was I would say today, that's the best thing I did for myself. And then you and I can have a conversation and talk about other exercises that are useful. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for this. Because I thought I had no hope. Because like
no, there's total methods. It's fine. You'll be perfectly fine.
Okay. Because I just wanted to add that there's a phenomena of a TikTok brain where there is less gray matter in children that are exposed to social media. Basically, it's really bad. So I'm really worried about further generations.
Me too. Me too. But the brain is a plastic thing. Neurons are always being created. Even if you do damage to them, they're always able to heal in miraculous ways. So don't overstress it. You're still so young. You're good.
Yeah. Okay then. Thanks a lot.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Cool. All right, guys. It was a pleasure tonight. I'm super happy. Had a fun time, and I'm gonna put this up probably next week or so online so people can share it.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Matt.
Merci.
Thank you.
Hi.
Au revoir.